Hey friends! Glad you're here at Fiction Blue. We've cooked up something special. What if the Goblins reclaimed Privet Drive as a Potter property and turned the Dursleys into their servants? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1, The Knock That Shook the Foundation. The heat that July was the kind that stuck to everything. It sat on the rooftops of Little whinging like a fat, lazy cat, pressing down on the neat rows of identical houses and their neat, identical gardens until the whole neighborhood shimmered. Sprinklers ticked back and forth across emerald lawns. Cars ticked and cooled in driveways. Even the dogs had given up barking. Inside number 4, Privet Drive, the heat was worse, because Vernon Dursley did not believe in opening windows. Open windows invited bugs, noises, and, worst of all, the neighbors' opinions about what might be going on inside. So the house sat sealed like a thermos, and the only relief came from a single oscillating fan in the sitting room that Vernon had angled toward his own armchair with the precision of a man who understood that comfort, like everything else in life, had a proper hierarchy. Harry Potter was not part of that hierarchy. He was in the back garden on his hands and knees, pulling weeds from between Petunia's rose bushes. The sun had been at his neck for 3 hours and the skin there felt tight and hot, the kind of burn that would sting in the shower later if he was allowed a shower later. His fingers were dirt black and scratched from thorns, and a thin line of blood ran from his left thumb where he'd grabbed a stem wrong. He didn't bother wiping it. The blood would dry and the cut would close, and by tomorrow there'd only be a thin pink line to add to the collection. He was 10. He'd be 11 in a week. Not that it mattered. Birthdays at number 4 meant Dudley asking loudly at breakfast whether the freak was going to try to steal his cake again, which Harry had never actually done, and Vernon grunting something about ungrateful mouths to feed, and Petunia finding some additional chore that needed doing so Harry would be out of sight by the time any guests arrived. Last year it had been scrubbing the oven. The year before that, repainting the garden shed. Harry had stopped expecting anything from July 31st a long time ago. He rocked back on his heels and squinted up at the house. Through the kitchen window he could see Petunia moving around, probably starting dinner. Through the sitting room window, the big bay one that Vernon was so proud of, he could see the blue flicker of the television and the top of Dudley's head, round and blonde, bobbing slightly as he shoveled something into his mouth from a bowl balanced on his stomach. Harry looked back at the roses. 3 more bushes to go. His knees ached against the baked earth and his stomach made a low, grinding sound that he'd learned to ignore by the age of 6. Lunch had been a slice of bread and a glass of water, taken standing up at the kitchen counter while Petunia watched to make sure he didn't touch anything else in the refrigerator. Dinner would depend on Vernon's mood. He pulled another weed. Then another. The mindless rhythm of it was almost soothing. Pull, toss, shift sideways, pull, toss, shift. He'd gotten good at finding the small, numb places in his head where time moved faster and the hunger and heat blurred into background noise. It was a skill he'd never had to be taught. It had grown in him the way calluses grew on his hands, slowly, necessarily, without anyone asking whether it should be there. The bang of the back door made him flinch. He hated that he still flinched. He'd been working on not flinching for 2 years and he still couldn't stop it, the way his shoulders jerked up and his head ducked, animal quick, before his brain caught up and told him to relax. Vernon stood in the doorway, filling most of it. He was a big man, not tall, but wide, with a neck that had long since surrendered its distinction from his shoulders and a mustache that bristled like the business end of a broom. He was holding a glass of lemonade that Petunia had made, the good kind with real lemons, and he drank from it while looking at Harry the way a man looks at a stain on his carpet. "You're not finished." 3 more bushes, Uncle Vernon. "Should have been done an hour ago." Harry said nothing. There was never a right answer to that kind of statement. Agreement invited a lecture about laziness. Disagreement invited worse. Vernon drank again, ice cubes clinking. "And when you're done with that, the gutters need clearing. Front and back." "Yes, Uncle Vernon." "And don't track dirt through my house." "No, Uncle Vernon." Vernon lingered, the way he sometimes did, as though waiting for Harry to say something that would justify what came next. Harry kept his eyes on the roses and his hands in the dirt and waited, and eventually the back door banged shut again and the house swallowed Vernon back into its cool, sealed interior. Harry let out a slow breath. 3 more bushes. Then the gutters. Then, if he was lucky, he'd get a portion of whatever Petunia made for dinner, probably the scraps after the Dursleys had eaten their fill, and then he'd crawl into his cupboard under the stairs and lie in the dark and listen to the house settle around him like a living thing that had decided, long ago, that he didn't belong inside it. He was reaching for the next weed when something happened. It was small. The kind of thing that, on any other day, he might not have noticed. A vibration in the ground under his knees. Not a tremor, exactly, not like a truck passing on the road, but something deeper, something that resonated in his molars and the backs of his eyes and the space behind his sternum. It came and went in a single pulse, like a heartbeat, and then the air was still again and the sprinkler across the street ticked on and a dog barked once, somewhere. Harry held very still. He'd felt things before. Things he couldn't explain and had learned not to mention. The time his hair grew back overnight after Petunia sheared it off with kitchen scissors. The time he'd ended up on the school roof without knowing how he'd gotten there. The time Dudley's gang had cornered him behind the bins and something had pushed them all backward like a gust of wind that came from nowhere and everywhere. He'd felt things, all his life, strange currents that moved through him and around him, and he'd locked every one of those memories in a box in his head marked "don't" because thinking about them led to questions, and questions led to the word he was never supposed to say. But this vibration hadn't come from inside him. It had come from somewhere else. Somewhere underneath. As if something very old had shifted in its sleep. He pressed his palm flat against the ground and waited. Nothing. Just dirt and heat and the faraway hiss of the sprinkler. He pulled his hand back and looked at it. Just a hand. Dirty, scratched, small for his age. He went back to weeding. The sun moved. The shadows of the rose bushes stretched east. Harry finished the last bush, gathered the pile of weeds into the green bin by the shed, rinsed his hands under the garden tap, and went around the side of the house to look at the gutters. They were clogged with leaf mush from the spring, dark and wet-smelling even in the heat, and he'd need the ladder from the garage. The ladder was heavy. Vernon knew the ladder was heavy. That was part of the point. Harry was dragging it across the front lawn when he saw the first one. It was standing at the end of the driveway. Perfectly still. About 3.5 feet tall, wearing what looked like a dark suit of leather armor over a high-collared tunic, and watching Harry with eyes that were black from edge to edge, like 2 drops of ink pressed into a face that was all angles and sharp edges and not even remotely human. Harry stopped. The ladder's end dug into the grass. He stared. The creature stared back. It had long fingers, longer than they should have been, and they were wrapped around the handle of something that hung at its belt. Its ears were pointed. Its teeth, when it opened its mouth slightly, were filed to points. Then there was another one. To the left, at the edge of Mrs. No. 6 hedge. Same armor. Same eyes. This one was broader, thicker through the chest, and carried an actual axe across its back. The blade caught the afternoon sun and threw a sliver of light across the pavement. Then 2 more, stepping out from behind the Dursleys' car in the driveway as though they'd been standing there all along and had simply decided to become visible. These 2 flanked the car on either side and took up positions with the practiced ease of soldiers who had done this 1,000 times. Harry's heart was hammering. He could feel it in his throat, his wrists, behind his eyes. But he didn't run. Running hadn't worked when Dudley's gang chased him. Running definitely didn't seem advisable when the things that were surrounding his house had axes. He set the ladder down carefully on the grass. "Hello," he said. The first creature, the one at the end of the driveway, tilted its head. Something shifted in those ink-black eyes. Surprise, maybe. "You are not afraid," it said. The voice was rough, like gravel turning in a drum. Should I be? Most wizards are. The word hit Harry like a punch. Wizards. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Then opened it again. I'm not a wizard. You are. The creature studied him for another moment, then seemed to reach a decision. It inclined its head, not a bow, exactly, more like an acknowledgement between equals. You are Harry James Potter. Son of James Fleamont Potter and Lily Potter née Evans. Last of the bloodline. Heir to the noble and most ancient house of Potter. A pause. And you are standing in what is legally, magically, and by treaty right, your garden. Harry looked down at the grass under his feet. Then back up. I don't, what? The sound of an engine came from the end of the street. Not a car engine. Something deeper, something that thrummed in that same tooth-rattling frequency Harry had felt in the back garden. A vehicle was coming down Privet Drive, except it wasn't a vehicle, not really, it was a carriage, black and iron-bound, pulled by nothing at all, rolling on wheels that didn't quite touch the road. It moved in absolute silence despite the sound it was making, which wasn't sound at all but something felt, something that vibrated in the marrow. The carriage stopped in front of number 4. The door opened from the inside. The goblin who stepped out was old. That was the first thing Harry noticed. Not frail, never frail, but old the way mountains are old, the way riverbeds are old, worn into something harder than what they'd started as. He wore robes of deep burgundy over armor that looked like it had been forged from something darker than steel, and his fingers, gnarled, long, heavy with rings, gripped a staff of black wood topped with a gem that pulsed with faint, reddish light. His eyes were the same ink black as the others, but deeper. There were centuries in those eyes. Behind him, 2 more goblins emerged. One was younger, sharp-featured, wearing what looked like a banker's suit modified for someone with clawed hands. The other was female. Harry could tell by the structure of the face, the cheekbones, the way the armor fitted differently across the chest, and she was the most heavily armed of all of them, with a short sword at each hip and something that looked like a collapsed crossbow mounted on her left forearm. The old goblin looked at Harry. Harry looked at the old goblin. Merlin's teeth, the old goblin said. They've got you doing yard work. Harry glanced down at himself. Dirt-caked knees, scratched hands, Dudley's old shirt hanging off him like a sail, and glasses held together with tape. He looked back up. They've got me doing a lot of things. The old goblin's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted, tightened, like a fist closing around something breakable. He turned to the female goblin. Iron Claw. Assessment. The female goblin, Iron Claw, had been scanning Harry with those black eyes since she'd stepped out of the carriage. Now she spoke, and her voice was different from the first goblin's, smoother, clipped, with an accent Harry couldn't place. Malnourished. Historical evidence of repeated minor injuries, most healed without medical attention. Magical core suppressed but intact, significantly intact, director. The suppression appears to be environmental, not inflicted. He's been living under wards that have been siphoning ambient magic for stabilization. She paused. He's underweight by approximately 30% for his age group. And the residents? Ironclaw's gaze moved to the house. Her lip curled. Potter family wards underneath. Dumbledore's blood ward layered on top without authorization, anchored to the existing Potter ward matrix. The blood ward is functional but crude. It's been drawing on the Potter wards for power, and on the boy's magical core as a secondary battery. The curl of her lip became something closer to a snarl. The boy's been powering his own cage. Harry didn't understand half of what she'd said, but he understood the tone. And he understood the word cage. Right, the old goblin said. He planted his staff on the pavement and the gem at its top flared once, red gold, and Harry felt that vibration again, the same pulse he'd felt in the back garden, but stronger now, intentional, like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting. My name is Ragnarok. I am the director of Gringotts Wizarding Bank and the elected head of the Goblin Nation's Council of Elders. I have been the steward of the Potter family accounts for 137 years. He fixed Harry with a stare that could have cut diamond. I've come to meet my client, rectify a rather significant series of violations, and have a word with the people who've been living in his house. His house, the younger goblin, the one in the banker's suit, murmured, almost to himself, with a thin smile that showed pointed teeth. Harry's brain was doing something it rarely did. It was racing ahead, fitting pieces together before he'd consciously decided to think about them. His house. Potter family wards. The stipend Gringotts had been sending. He didn't know what a stipend was, but the shape of the idea was forming. Money, sent for his care, and the Dursleys had, the money, Harry said quietly. You sent money. For me. Ragnar's jaw tightened. We did. 400 galleons per month. Approximately £2,000 sterling, converted quarterly and deposited into the Muggle bank account of Vernon Dursley per the guardianship arrangement filed with the Ministry of Magic in November 1981. He paused. You were not aware. I sleep in a cupboard under the stairs, Harry said. I eat what's left after they're done. These are my cousin's old clothes. So no. I wasn't aware. Something happened on Ragnar's face. Harry would think about it later, many times, and he'd never quite find the right word for it. It wasn't anger, though anger was part of it. It wasn't pity, goblins didn't do pity, he'd learn that soon enough. It was something closer to what a master craftsman might feel upon discovering that someone had taken his finest work and used it to prop open a door. Offense so deep it became a kind of fury. An insult to the craft of the thing. Grip hook, Ragnar said, and his voice had dropped to something that was almost a whisper, which was worse than shouting. The younger goblin stepped forward. Director. The file. Griphook produced a leather folio from inside his suit jacket. The folio shouldn't have fit there, but it did, and opened it. His eyes scanned the pages rapidly. The Potter Family Trust established in 1943 by Fremont Potter designated number 4, Privet Drive and surrounding lots, numbers 2, 6, and 8, as purchased properties held in trust for the Potter line. The purchase was completed in 1980 by James Potter as a safe house contingency, registered with Gringotts under account ledger 774, sub-file 19. Title was never transferred. The property remains, legally and magically, Potter land. And the occupants? Griphook's thin smile returned. Vernon and Petunia Dursley took residence in November 1981 under an arrangement facilitated by Albus Dumbledore, acting as, he glanced at the file, magical guardian of Harry James Potter. No lease was negotiated with Gringotts. No rent has been paid. The monthly stipend of 400 galleons was activated simultaneously and has been collected in full for 117 consecutive months without a single expenditure traceable to the care of the Potter heir. The number landed in Harry's head and sat there, enormous. 117 months. 400 galleons each. He didn't know how much a galleon was worth, not yet, but he knew what £2,000 a month looked like in the Dursley household. It looked like Dudley's second bedroom full of toys, like Vernon's new company car every other year, like Petunia's kitchen renovation and the holiday to Majorca and the riding lessons Dudley quit after one session because the horse was looking at him funny. All of it. All of it had been mine, Harry said. Not a question. Yours, Ragnar confirmed. Every sickle. Every canute. Every galleon. And we are here to collect. The front door of number 4 opened and Vernon Dursley stepped out onto the front step. Harry watched it happen the way you watch a car accident, that strange, slow-motion clarity where every detail registers with perfect precision. Vernon in his weekend polo shirt, sweat-stained at the armpits. Vernon's face, already red from the heat, going a shade redder as he took in the scene on his front lawn. Vernon's mouth opening, then closing, then opening again as his eyes moved from Harry to the ladder on the grass to the goblins to the carriage to the axe-wielding creatures flanking his car to Ragnock standing in the driveway with a staff that pulsed with otherworldly light. "What?" Vernon said. "The bloody hell, Vernon Dursley," Ragnock said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words carried in that vibration below sound that made the windows of the house rattle gently in their frames. "I suggest you step inside. We have matters to discuss and I prefer to conduct business without an audience." Vernon's face completed its journey to purple. "Now see here, I don't know what sort of, you can't just, this is my house." "No," Ragnock said. "It isn't." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Harry could feel it pressing against his eardrums. Even the sprinkler across the street seemed to pause. "Ironclaw," Ragnock said. "Perimeter." Ironclaw raised her left hand and snapped her fingers. The sound was sharp, metallic, her claws striking against each other through actual sparks, and the goblins that had been positioned around the property moved. They moved fast, faster than anything that size should move, flowing like mercury around the edges of the lot until they formed a ring that encompassed the entire property. As each one took position, something shimmered in the air between them, a faint lattice of golden light, visible for just a moment before it faded into transparency. "Privacy ward," Ironclaw said, catching Harry's look. "No muggle will notice anything. No wizard will be able to breach the perimeter without my authorization." She flashed those pointed teeth. "We're good at what we do." "Inside," Ragnock said again, looking at Vernon. "Now." Vernon spluttered. It was remarkable, really, the man could convey fury, indignation, terror, and complete cognitive collapse all in a single splutter. But he was looking at the ring of armored goblins around his property, and at the axe blades catching the sun, and at Ragnock's staff with its pulsing gem, and whatever primitive survival instinct lived in the deepest part of Vernon Dursley's brain was screaming at him loud enough to override even his monumental stubbornness. He went inside. They followed. The interior of number 4, Privet Drive looked exactly like it always did. Immaculate. Petunia's domain, the cream carpet without a single stain, the perfectly aligned family photos on the wall, none of which included Harry, the brass fixtures polished to mirrors, the sitting room with its coordinated sofa cushions and its cabinet of decorative plates that no one ever used. It smelled like lemon cleaner and the roast Petunia had started for dinner, and underneath that, very faintly, of the cedar blocks Petunia kept in every drawer and closet because she'd read in a magazine that they prevented moths. Harry had cleaned every inch of this house 1,000 times and it had never felt like his. It still didn't. But something was shifting. That pulse in the ground, the one he'd felt in the garden, it was here too, under the foundation, a low hum that seemed to respond to his presence. When he stepped across the threshold, the hum strengthened, and for just a moment, every light in the house flickered. Petunia was in the kitchen doorway. She'd gone white. Not red, like Vernon, white, the color of someone who had been waiting for something terrible for a very long time and had just heard it knock. "No," she whispered. "No, you can't be here, we had a deal, he said we'd be left alone." "Your deal," Ragnock said, moving through the hallway with the unhurried confidence of someone who owns the ground he walks on, "was with Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore does not speak for Gringotts. Albus Dumbledore does not speak for the Potter estate. And Albus Dumbledore most certainly does not have the authority to give away Potter property, redirect Potter gold, or place Potter heirs in the care of." He looked around the hallway, his gaze snagging on the cupboard under the stairs, on its small bolt latch, on the faint crayon letters on the inside of the door that spelled Harry's room, this. Ragnock went still. The others went still with him. Even the air seemed to stop. Griphook was the closest to the cupboard. He reached out and opened the door, and the smell of it came out, the close, warm, stale smell of a space too small for a growing child, of a thin mattress on the floor and a single blanket and the broken toys Dudley had thrown away that Harry had rescued and kept on a shelf made from a plank and 2 stacks of old books. There was a plastic army man with one arm. There was a wind-up clock with no hands. There was a drawing, done in crayon on the back of a takeaway menu, of a house with a garden and a stick figure standing in the garden with a big, lopsided smile. Griphook looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he closed the cupboard door very gently. "Director," he said, and his voice had changed. Something young had cracked in it, and something much older had come through. "I see it," Ragnarok said. Dudley had appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by the commotion, his mouth still smeared with chocolate. He took one look at the goblins in his hallway and sat down heavily on the top step with a whimper, his hands gripping the banister rails. Ragnarok walked into the sitting room. He didn't ask permission. He moved to the center of the room and turned, surveying it the way a general surveys a battlefield, and then he planted his staff on the carpet and the gem at its top blazed crimson. The house groaned. Not metaphorically, actually groaned, a deep sound from the foundations and the walls and the bones of the structure itself, like something stretching after a very long sleep. The photographs on the walls rattled. The decorative plates in the cabinet chimed against each other. And then, rising up through the floor like light through water, golden lines appeared, patterns, interlocking, geometric, beautiful, spreading from the point where Ragnarok's staff touched the ground, racing along the baseboards and up the walls and across the ceiling. "Potter Family Ward Matrix," Ironclaw said, from behind Harry. "Original enchantments, laid in 1980. They've been dormant for a decade, buried under Dumbledore's modifications. The director is waking them up." The golden lines pulsed, once, twice, and then steadied into a warm, constant glow. And Harry felt it. He felt it in his chest, in the space behind his ribs where his heart beat, a warmth that had nothing to do with the July heat. It was recognition. The house was recognizing him. The wards, whatever they were reaching out to him like hands reaching out to a child they'd been separated from, tentative and hopeful and fierce all at once. "Touch the wall," Ragnarok said, watching Harry's face. Harry crossed to the nearest wall and pressed his palm flat against it. The golden lines flared where his skin made contact and raced outward from his hand like ripples in a pond, and the warmth exploded through him, not painfully, but hugely, the way a breath feels after you've been underwater too long, and the house sighed. Every room, every door, every window. A sound of settling. Of completion. "The wards have accepted their heir," Griphook said, writing something in his folio. Timestamp, 4:17 p.m., July 24, 1991. Let the record show that Harry James Potter has been recognized by the Potter Family Ward Matrix as the rightful owner and master of the property designated number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. "You can't do this." Vernon had found his voice. He was standing in the doorway of the sitting room, Petunia behind him, and his face had achieved a shade of purple that suggested imminent cardiac involvement. "This is my home. I have a mortgage. I have paperwork." "Your mortgage," Griphook said, not looking up from his folio, "has been paid in full since 1980 using Potter family funds. Your paperwork is a Muggle legal fiction constructed to support the guardianship arrangement. The land registry for this property lists the owner as the Fleamont Potter Family Trust, care of Gringotts Wizarding Bank." He turned a page. "You have been, in the legal terminology of both the Goblin Nation and the International Confederation of Wizards, squatting." Vernon made a sound that was halfway between a roar and a wheeze. "I'll call the police." "Please do," Ironclaw said. "They won't be able to see the house." Vernon looked at her. Then at the window. Through it, Privet Drive looked normal. Mrs. Number 7 was watering her petunias, old Mr. Kellerman from Number 12 was walking his Yorkshire Terrier, but there was that shimmer at the edge of the property, that faint golden lattice, and Harry understood with sudden, absolute certainty that the world outside had simply stopped noticing them. "Sit down, Mr. Dursley," Ragnarok said. It was not a suggestion. Vernon sat. He dropped onto the sofa like a man whose strings had been cut. Petunia lowered herself beside him, her hands clasped in her lap, her knuckles white. She hadn't taken her eyes off Ragnarok since the hallway. Not with Vernon's bluster, not with fear, with something older than either. Recognition. You know who I am, Ragnar said to her. I know what you are, Petunia said. Her voice was thin but steady. Lily told me. Goblins. You run the bank. We don't merely run a bank, Mrs. Dursley. We are a nation. A sovereign people with our own laws, our own justice, and our own memory, and our memory is very, very long. Ragnar lowered himself into Vernon's armchair. It should have looked absurd, this small, ancient creature in the oversized chair, but it didn't. It looked like a king settling onto a throne he'd temporarily loaned to someone unworthy. You have lived in a Potter house for 10 years. You have collected Potter gold for 10 years. And in exchange, you have starved, worked, belittled, and imprisoned a Potter heir for 10 years. He adjusted one of his rings. I am here to settle the account. We didn't ask for the boy. Vernon burst out. He was left on our doorstep like a bloody bottle of milk. We never wanted, and yet you took the money. The silence came back. Heavier this time. Every month, Ragnar continued. £2,000, converted from 400 galleons at the current exchange rate, deposited into your account at Barclays on the first business day of each calendar month. We have the transaction records. All 117 of them. Not a single penny was spent on the child. He let that sit. You had options, Mr. Dursley. You could have returned the gold. You could have contacted the magical authorities and refused the arrangement. You could have, at the very minimum, fed the boy properly and given him a bedroom. You did none of these things. You took the gold and you locked a child in a cupboard. By Goblin law, and I assure you, it is Goblin law that governs this property, since it sits on Goblin-managed land, that constitutes theft, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty to a minor under the protection of the bank. Goblin law, Vernon spat. I don't recognize you don't have to, Ragnar said pleasantly. That's the lovely thing about Goblin law. It doesn't require your recognition. It requires only your compliance. Griphook stepped forward, folio open. Under Article 17 of the Treaty of Gringotts, ratified in 1743 and reaffirmed by the International Confederation of Wizards in 1946, the Goblin Nation retains full legal jurisdiction over all properties held in Goblin-managed trust. Number 4, Privet Drive is such a property. Under Article 23 of the same treaty, any non-authorized occupant of a Goblin-managed trust property who has benefited materially from said property and caused demonstrable harm to the trust's designated beneficiary may be bound in service to the beneficiary as restitution. Vernon stared. Bound in, what does that, servitude, Mr. Dursley, Griphook said. You owe a debt you cannot pay in gold, because the damage is not merely financial. You cannot unstarve a child. You cannot unbruise him. You cannot give back the years of warmth and safety you stole. So you will pay in the only currency you have left. He closed the folio. Your labor. Your obedience. Your service to the boy you wronged. Petunia made a small sound. Not a word, just a sound, pulled from somewhere deep in her chest. Vernon was shaking his head back and forth in short, jerky movements, like a dog trying to shake off water. You're mad, he whispered. You're all mad. This isn't, you can't, I'm a British citizen, I have rights. You had a child in a cupboard, Ironclaw said from the hallway, and her voice was the quietest Harry had ever heard it, which made it the most frightening. What rights do you imagine you deserve? Vernon looked at Harry. Harry looked back. For 10 years, that gaze had been enough to make Harry's stomach clench, to make him drop his eyes and shrink into himself, to make him feel small and wrong and unwanted. He'd learned to fear that gaze the way you learn to fear a raised hand, not because it always hit, but because it always could. He didn't look away. Something in Vernon's face crumbled. Not because of the goblins. Not because of the axes or the wards or the treaty. Because of the way Harry was looking at him, steady, level, calm, and Vernon realized, perhaps for the first time, that the boy in front of him was not afraid. Ragnock reached into his robes and produced a scroll. It was old, the parchment had a yellowish tint and the edges were gilt, and when he unrolled it, the writing on it moved, shifting and rearranging itself in characters that were neither English nor any human language Harry could identify. The Binding of Debt, Ragnock said. Ancient magic. Older than Hogwarts, older than the Ministry, older than the wand. Goblin magic at its most fundamental. He held the scroll up and the characters blazed gold. Vernon Dursley. Petunia Dursley née Evans. You are hereby bound in service to the House of Potter, represented by its sole heir, Harry James Potter, until such time as the debt you owe, assessed by the Goblin Nation at 117 months of stolen gold, compounded by 10 years of documented neglect and abuse, is repaid in full. The terms of service are to be determined by the heir and his representatives. I won't, Vernon started. Ragnock brought the base of his staff down on the floor. The impact made no sound. Instead, it produced a concussion of magic that Harry felt in his bones, a wave of power that rolled through the house and through the wards and through the golden lines on the walls, and Vernon Dursley's voice stopped in his throat. Not because he chose to stop. Because the house stopped it for him. The terms are not negotiable, Ragnock said. The binding is not optional. You are on Potter land, in a Potter house, surrounded by Potter wards, and you have been judged by the nation that holds Potter gold in trust. You will serve, or you will leave this house with nothing, no home, no savings, no possessions, since everything you own was purchased with stolen funds, and face criminal proceedings in the wizarding world for your treatment of a magical child. He paused, letting it land. I am told your Muggle prisons are unpleasant. Ours are worse. Petunia was crying. Silently, without movement, tears tracking down her thin face while she sat perfectly still with her hands in her lap. Vernon had gone gray. Not red, not purple, gray, the color of a man who has just understood that the world is much larger and much more dangerous than he ever imagined, and that he is very, very small in it. Dudley was still on the stairs. Harry could hear him whimpering softly. Harry looked at Ragnock. Can I say something? Ragnock inclined his head. It is your house. You may say whatever you wish. Harry turned to the Dursleys. He didn't sit down. He stood in the middle of the sitting room with the golden ward light swimming gently on the walls around him, and he was 10 years old and undersized and wearing his cousin's old clothes and he had dirt under his fingernails from weeding their garden, and he said, I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to be left on your doorstep and I didn't ask to be a wizard and I definitely didn't ask to sleep in a cupboard for 10 years while you spent money that was meant for me. But you chose. Every single day, you chose. You chose to lock me in. You chose to tell me my parents were drunks who died in a car crash. You chose to let Dudley use me as a punching bag. You had £2,000 a month to take care of me and I got bread crusts and hand-me-downs. He paused. Not for effect, because his throat was tight and he needed a second. I don't want revenge, he said. I'm not like you. But I want it to be fair. For once, I want something to be fair. He turned to Ragnock. I accept the binding. Ragnock smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was a goblin smile, all teeth and ancient satisfaction, the smile of a being who had watched empires rise and fall and had outlasted every single one of them. So noted. He unrolled the scroll fully and held it aloft, and the golden characters blazed so bright that Harry had to squint. Ragnock spoke in a language Harry didn't understand, harsh, rhythmic, resonant, and the house responded. The ward lines on the walls flared. The floor vibrated. The air itself seemed to thicken with magic so dense Harry could taste it, metallic and sharp, like biting down on a coin. Vernon gasped. Petunia gasped. Something was happening to them, Harry could see it, a shimmer around their bodies, a tightening, as though invisible chains were settling over them. Not physical chains. Nothing crude or visible. But the magic was there, threaded through the air, connecting them to the scroll, to the house, to Harry. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. When it was over, Vernon slumped forward on the sofa with his head in his hands. Petunia sat rigid, staring at nothing. And on the inside of each of their right wrists, glowing faintly gold against the skin, was a symbol, a small, intricate knot of lines that Harry recognized instinctively, without knowing how, as the Potter family crest. "The binding is complete," Griphook said, making a final note in his folio. "Let the record show." Ragnarok rolled up the scroll and tucked it away. He looked old again, tired. The magic had cost him something, Harry thought, but his eyes were still sharp and his voice was still steady. "Now then," he said. "There are practicalities to discuss. Griphook will handle the financial restructuring. Ironclaw will oversee the security arrangements. The Dursley boy," he glanced toward the stairs where Dudley was sitting frozen, "is a minor and is therefore not included in the binding, though he is expected to behave appropriately in a house he no longer commands." "And the Dursleys?" Harry asked. "Will serve. Meals, cleaning, maintenance of the property, all tasks previously assigned to you will be reassigned to them. They will have adequate quarters, adequate food, and adequate rest. Goblins are not cruel, Mr. Potter." He met Harry's eyes. "We are merely precise." Ironclaw had been moving through the house during the binding, checking rooms, testing walls, doing things with her hands that left faint trails of silver light in the air. Now she returned to the sitting room. "The upper floors are clear. Master bedroom is suitable for the heir. The small second bedroom currently occupied by the Dursley boys' surplus possessions will be converted to an office. The Dursleys can have the remaining bedroom and the cupboard," she paused, and something dangerous flickered in her expression, "can be sealed shut." "Actually," Harry said, "tear it out." Everyone looked at him. "The cupboard. Remove it. I don't want it in my house." He hesitated. "Please." Ironclaw grinned. It was the most alarming expression Harry had ever seen on a face. "With pleasure, Mr. Potter." She unsheathed one of her short swords and walked to the cupboard under the stairs and, in 4 swift, precise strikes, cut the door off its hinges. It fell to the hallway floor with a bang. She kicked the thin mattress out. She pulled the shelf off the wall. The broken toys scattered across the carpet, the one-armed soldier, the handless clock, and she swept them aside and drove the blade of her sword into the back wall of the cupboard and pulled. The wall came away in chunks. Behind it was brick and then the wooden frame of the staircase itself. Ironclaw worked quickly, methodically, and in less than 2 minutes the cupboard under the stairs was gone. Just a ragged opening in the wall, the guts of the house exposed, dust settling in the golden ward light. "It'll need finishing," Ironclaw said, sheathing her sword. "I'll have a construction team here by morning. Goblin carpentry. Infinitely superior to anything humans do with wood." Harry looked at the hole where his bedroom had been. At the dust motes floating in the slant of late afternoon sun. At the crayon drawing of the happy house, which had landed face up on the carpet. He picked it up. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. "Mr. Potter," Griphook said, appearing at his elbow. "If you'd like to see the master bedroom. It is, technically, yours now." Harry followed him upstairs. The master bedroom was at the end of the hall, he'd never been inside it. It was larger than he'd imagined, with a queen bed and heavy curtains and an en-suite bathroom. Vernon's things were everywhere, his ties hanging on the wardrobe door, his shoes lined up by the wall, the dent in the mattress where he slept every night. It smelled like Vernon, aftershave and sweat and the particular staleness of a man who had stopped trying to impress anyone. "We'll have it cleaned and refurnished within the day," Griphook said. "Goblin interior design tends toward the martial, but we can adapt to human preferences." Harry sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was soft, so soft, softer than anything he'd ever sat on. He pressed his hands into it and felt the springs give and the fabric yield, and he had a sudden, violent urge to cry that he suppressed with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to every other feeling that threatened to make him vulnerable. Grip hook. Mr. Potter. How much money do I have? Grip hook's expression shifted into something that might have been professional pride. The Potter family vault, Vault 687, contains liquid assets of approximately 31 million galleons. In addition, there is the Potter investment portfolio, which includes significant holdings in magical and muggle enterprises, valued at approximately 47 million galleons. There is the Potter property portfolio, this house being merely the least of its holdings, which includes estates in Wales, Scotland, the south of France, and an island in the Aegean. There are the Potter heirlooms, artifacts, and historical items, which are of incalculable value. There are the trust funds, the charitable endowments, the seat on the Wiesengemot, and the various political alliances that accrue to a family of your standing. He paused. In total, the House of Potter is the third wealthiest house in magical Britain, behind only the House of Black, currently in abeyance, and the House of Malfoy. Although, between us, the Malfoys are considerably more leveraged than they'd like anyone to know. Harry stared at him. I've been wearing my cousin's underwear. Yes, Griphook said. That is going to stop. Harry laughed. It surprised him. It surprised Griphook too. The goblin's black eyes widened slightly, and then he laughed as well, a short, sharp bark that sounded like it didn't get much exercise. They came back downstairs to find that things had changed. The goblins outside had been busy. Harry could see them through the windows, doing things to the garden and the exterior walls that left faint traceries of silver and gold light. Ironclaw was in the kitchen, examining the contents of the refrigerator with an expression of deep personal offense. Ragnock was still in Vernon's armchair, Harry's armchair, and Vernon and Petunia were standing in the kitchen doorway, side by side, looking like people who had just survived an earthquake and were waiting for the aftershock. They were wearing different clothes. Harry blinked. Instead of Vernon's polo shirt and Petunia's floral blouse, they were wearing simple gray tunics and trousers. Functional. Plain. Clean, but unmistakably the clothes of servants, no different from what you might see on a medieval estate. On the breast of each tunic, small and precise, was the same knotted crest that marked their wrists. Goblin tailoring, Ironclaw said, noticing Harry's look. Standard domestic service attire. Enchanted to resize as needed. Much more dignified than what they had the boy wearing, I must say. Vernon's face was doing complex, terrible things. His jaw was clenched so tight that a vein pulsed visibly at his temple, and his hands, hanging at his sides in those gray sleeves, were shaking. But he wasn't speaking. Whether that was the binding or simple shock, Harry couldn't tell. Dinner, Ragnock said, from the armchair. I believe the roast misses. Dursley was preparing will be adequate, once properly supplemented. Mrs. Dursley, you will finish preparing the meal. An additional place will be set for Mr. Potter at the head of the table. Mr. Dursley, you will set the table. For places, Mr. Potter, Griphook, Ironclaw, and myself. The Dursley family will eat afterward, in the kitchen. Vernon's vein pulsed harder. But he moved. Stiffly, like a man walking into a strong wind, but he moved. He went to the sideboard in the dining room and took out plates, and Harry watched him count 4 and set them on the table with hands that trembled, and something inside Harry that he didn't have a name for turned over slowly, like an animal waking up. It wasn't pleasure. He didn't enjoy watching Vernon suffer. That was important. He tested the feeling carefully, the way you test a sore tooth with your tongue, and confirmed it. No, he didn't enjoy this. But he recognized it. It was the same feeling he got when a maths equation balanced, when the numbers on both sides of the equal sign came out right. It was the feeling of something being correct. Petunia finished the roast. She served it at the dining room table, a table Harry had never been allowed to sit at, and he sat at the head of it, in the chair that had always been Vernon's, with Ragnock at his right and Griphook at his left and Ironclaw across from him. The food was good. Harry ate slowly, not because he wasn't hungry, he was ravenous, but because Griphook had quietly warned him that eating too much too fast after prolonged undernourishment would make him sick. "We'll have a healer examine you tomorrow," Griphook said, cutting his roast with precise, efficient movements. Goblin healers are superior to wizard healers in every meaningful way, though I acknowledge my bias. "You're not biased," Ironclaw said. "You're correct." "A healer for what?" Harry asked. Griphook and Ironclaw exchanged a glance. It was Ragnarok who answered. "You've been malnourished for a decade, Mr. Potter. That has consequences. Bone density, muscle development, organ function, immune response, all of it will have been affected. Additionally, your magical core has been partially suppressed by the ward configuration Dumbledore installed. Once we remove his modifications and restore the original Potter wards to full function, your core will begin to recover. The healer will monitor that process and provide nutritional and medical support." "Will it hurt?" "The ward modification removal?" "No. You may feel disoriented for a day or two. Some accidental magic is likely as your core rebalances." Ragnarok set down his knife and fork. "Mr. Potter. I want to be clear about something." "Yes, sir." Ragnarok studied him. "You called me sir. Should I not?" "You should not. You are the head of a noble and most ancient house. I am, in this context, your servant, the steward of your family's wealth. The appropriate address between us is my title and name, Director Ragnarok." A pause. "Though I confess I don't mind, sir. Few wizards have ever said it to a goblin." Harry nodded slowly. "Director Ragnarok. What did you want to be clear about?" "Albus Dumbledore will come," Ragnarok said. "Not tonight, our wards will prevent his immediate detection of what's happened here, but soon. Days, perhaps. He has monitoring charms keyed to this property and to you personally. When those charms stop reporting, he will investigate." The old goblin's expression hardened into something granite. "He will come with arguments. Reasonable arguments, persuasive arguments. He will speak of the greater good, of your safety, of threats you don't yet understand. He will try to convince you that what happened here today was a mistake, that the goblins overstepped, that you need his guidance and protection." Ragnarok leaned forward. "You don't. Why did he put me here?" Harry asked. "If the house was already ours, my family's, why didn't he just set it up properly? Tell the goblins?" "Because informing the goblins would have meant sharing control," Griphook said. "The Potter accounts are managed by Gringotts. If Dumbledore had worked through proper channels, we would have appointed a goblin liaison, audited the guardianship arrangement, ensured the gold was spent correctly, and most importantly, maintained contact with you. You would have grown up knowing who you are." "And Dumbledore didn't want that," Harry said. "Not a question. Dumbledore," Ragnarok said, "wanted a weapon he could aim. Weapons are most effective when they don't know they're weapons." He picked up his fork again. "We intend to ensure you are no one's weapon, Mr. Potter. Not his. Not ours. You will be informed, you will be prepared, and you will make your own choices." The fork speared a piece of potato with unnecessary force. "That is what the Potter family has always paid us for." They finished dinner. Petunia cleared the plates in silence. Vernon stood in the kitchen and stared at the wall. Dudley had crept downstairs at some point during the meal and was sitting on the bottom step, watching everything with eyes that were wide and confused and, for perhaps the first time in his life, genuinely frightened. Harry paused by the stairs on his way up. He looked at Dudley. Dudley flinched. "I'm not going to hurt you," Harry said. Dudley just stared. Harry went upstairs. The master bedroom had already been transformed, the goblin workers moved with terrifying efficiency. Vernon's belongings were gone, boxed and moved to the smaller bedroom. The bed had been remade with fresh linens that smelled like something Harry couldn't identify, clean, but not lemon clean, something warmer, like wood smoke and honey. The curtains had been changed to deep red. On the bedside table was a lamp that glowed with soft, warm light that wasn't electric. It was magical, the first openly magical thing Harry had ever owned. On the desk by the window, a new desk, goblin made, dark wood with brass fittings, was a folder. Harry opened it. Inside was a photograph. 2 people. A man with black hair that stuck up in the back exactly like Harry's, and round glasses, and a grin that took up his whole face. A woman with dark red hair and green eyes, Harry's eyes, exactly Harry's eyes, and a smile that was quieter than the man's but deeper, like she was smiling at something only she could see. They were holding a baby. Harry sat down in the desk chair and held the photograph and looked at his parents for the first time in his memory. They moved. The photograph moved, the man kept glancing at the woman and then at the baby and then at whoever was taking the picture, and the woman was laughing at something, and the baby was waving a fat fist at the camera, and they were alive in this little rectangle of paper, alive and happy and young, and they were his. The photograph was in the vault, Griphook said from the doorway. There are many more. Albums. Letters. Artifacts. When you visit Gringotts, you can see everything. Harry didn't look up. Thank you, Griphook. A pause. You're welcome, Mr. Potter. The door closed. Harry sat in the chair and held the photograph, and outside the window, Privet Drive settled into evening. The sprinklers turned off. The lights in the houses went on, one by one. Normal people living normal lives, oblivious to the fact that 4 doors down, the world had changed. In the kitchen below, Harry could hear the clink of dishes as Vernon and Petunia washed up. The binding held. The wards hummed. The house, his house, breathed around him. He put the photograph on the desk, propped against the lamp, where he could see it from the bed. Then he crossed to the window and looked out. 2 goblin guards were visible in the garden, still as statues, moonlight catching the edges of their armor. Beyond the garden, the street. Beyond the street, the world. A week from now, he'd turn 11. He was a wizard. He was the head of a noble and most ancient house. He had money, property, allies, and a face full of freckles and a lightning bolt scar that apparently meant something he didn't yet understand. Somewhere out there, Albus Dumbledore didn't yet know what had happened here tonight. Somewhere out there, a world full of magic was waiting. Harry got into bed. The mattress was soft. The pillow was soft. The sheets were clean and warm and they smelled like wood smoke and honey, and he had never in his life slept in a bed this comfortable, had never had a room this large, had never felt this safe. He closed his eyes and the golden ward light pulsed gently through his eyelids, slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. His house. His wards. His family's magic, wrapped around him like arms he'd been too young to remember. Harry Potter slept. For the first time in 10 years, he did not dream of the cupboard. Chapter 2, The Weight of Gold and Blood. Harry woke to sunlight and the smell of bacon. Both of these things were wrong. Not wrong in the dangerous sense, wrong in the sense that they didn't belong to his life. Sunlight meant the cupboard door was open and he'd overslept and Vernon was going to have words. Bacon meant Petunia was cooking breakfast for the family and Harry would get whatever grease was left in the pan after everyone else had eaten, maybe scraped onto a piece of toast if he was quick about it. But the light wasn't coming through a crack under a door. It was pouring through a window, a real window, with red curtains pulled halfway back, and landing in a warm rectangle across a queen-sized bed in which Harry Potter was lying on his back, blinking at a ceiling that was much too far away to be the underside of a staircase. He sat up. The bedroom. The master bedroom. His bedroom. It hadn't been a dream. The photograph was still on the desk, propped against the magical lamp. His parents waved at him. His mother's hair caught a light that existed only inside the frame, and his father adjusted his glasses in a gesture so like Harry's own that it made his chest hurt. He swung his legs out of bed and his feet hit carpet, actual carpet, thick and warm, and he stood and crossed to the window and looked out. Privet Drive was already awake. Mrs. Number 6 was backing her Ford out of the driveway. The postman was 3 houses down, working his way along the street. Everything looked normal. Except for the 2 goblins standing in the front garden in full battle armor, still as garden statues, positioned on either side of the front path. And the faint shimmer in the air at the property line that Harry could see if he unfocused his eyes just slightly, the ward boundary, golden and humming, invisible to everyone but him. A knock at the bedroom door. Crisp, precise, exactly 3 raps. "Come in." Griphook entered. He was dressed in the same banker's suit as yesterday, but freshly pressed, and he was carrying a leather satchel over one shoulder. "Good morning, Mr. Potter. I trust you slept well. Better than I've ever slept in my life." "That's not a high bar, but still." Griphook's mouth twitched. "Breakfast is being prepared. Mrs. Dursley is cooking under Ironclaw's supervision. I'm told the menu includes bacon, eggs, toast, fresh fruit, and porridge." He consulted a small notebook he'd pulled from his jacket. "The healer will arrive at 9. After that, I have a full briefing prepared on your family history, your accounts, your properties, and the current political landscape of magical Britain. Director Ragnarok has returned to Gringotts for the morning but will be back this afternoon." He looked up. "Also, you need clothes." Harry looked down at himself. He was wearing one of Dudley's old t-shirts as a nightshirt. It came almost to his knees. "Yeah," he said. "I really do. A goblin tailor will arrive after the healer." In the meantime, Griphook reached into his satchel and produced a neatly folded stack of clothing, dark trousers, a green shirt, a lightweight jacket in charcoal gray. Simple, well-made, obviously expensive. Temporary provisions. "Ironclaw estimated your measurements last night." "Ironclaw estimated my measurements?" "Ironclaw can estimate the measurements of a fly at 30 paces. It's a targeting skill. She is, fundamentally, a warrior. Don't let the fact that she's currently terrorizing your aunt in the kitchen obscure that." Harry dressed. The clothes fit perfectly, or as perfectly as anything could fit a boy who was undersized and underweight. The trousers needed a belt, and the shirt was loose through the shoulders, but they were his. Not Dudley's cast-offs. Not oversized, stained, or torn. His. He looked at himself in the mirror on the wardrobe door. A thin boy with black hair that defied all known laws of physics looked back at him. Green eyes behind taped glasses. The scar on his forehead, shaped like a lightning bolt, partially hidden by his fringe. "The glasses," Griphook said. "The healer can fix your eyesight permanently, if you wish. Or we can have proper frames made. Goblin-forged eyewear is significantly more durable than," he eyed the tape, "whatever that is." "Fix the eyesight," Harry said. "Glasses are a liability." Griphook raised an eyebrow. "A liability? If someone punches you in the face, glasses break. The glass cuts your skin. Then you can't see, and you're bleeding." Harry said it matter-of-factly, the way you described the weather. "Better not to need them at all." Griphook was quiet for a moment. Then he wrote something in his notebook. "The healer will address it." They went downstairs. The house had changed further overnight. The hole where the cupboard had been was already framed in with new wood, darker than the original, richly grained, with joins so tight you couldn't see them. 2 goblin carpenters were working on it, moving with swift, silent precision, their tools making almost no sound. One of them nodded to Harry as he passed and said something in the harsh, rhythmic goblin language. Griphook responded in kind. "What did he say?" Harry asked. "He said, the wood knows its master. Goblin carpentry is partially magical, the wood responds to the owner of the home. It's been very cooperative. Apparently it's pleased. The wood is pleased. Goblin treated would develops a rudimentary awareness. Don't worry about it. The kitchen was a revelation. Petunia was at the stove, wearing the gray servant's tunic from last night, cooking with the stiff, mechanical movements of someone operating on autopilot. Her face was blotchy from crying, or from not sleeping, or both. Ironclaw was sitting on the kitchen counter with her legs crossed, eating an apple, watching Petunia with the casual attention of a cat watching a mouse. "Morning, Mr. Potter," Ironclaw said. "Your aunt makes acceptable bacon. I've had worse on campaign." Ironclaw has been deployed in 3 territorial disputes, 2 border conflicts, and what she refers to as, "that business in Zurich," Griphook murmured to Harry as they entered. She considers this assignment a vacation. "I consider this assignment a personal favor to the director," Ironclaw corrected, hopping down from the counter. "Also, I genuinely enjoy watching large, self-important humans do menial tasks. It satisfies something primal in me." Petunia's shoulders tightened but she said nothing. She transferred bacon from the pan to a plate and set it on the kitchen table, which had been laid for Harry's breakfast with a care and precision that Petunia had previously reserved only for Vernon. Eggs done properly, toast cut diagonally, a glass of orange juice, a bowl of fresh strawberries. Harry sat down and looked at it. He looked at it for long enough that Ironclaw's expression shifted from amused to something else. "Eat," she said, more gently than he'd heard her say anything. He ate. The bacon was crispy and hot and the eggs were done just right and the strawberries were sweet and the orange juice was cold and real, not the watered-down squash he usually got, and he ate slowly and carefully the way Griphook had told him to, and it was the best breakfast he'd ever had. Not because it was special food, it was just a normal breakfast, the kind Dudley got every morning, but because it was his. Because someone had cooked it for him. Because he was sitting at a table instead of standing at the counter. Vernon was not in the kitchen. Harry looked at Griphook. "Mr. Dursley Sr. is in the garden," Griphook said. "Weeding the rose bushes." Something in Harry's chest did that thing again, that slow turning, that sense of an equation balancing. He didn't smile. It wasn't funny. But it was correct. And Dudley? Still in his room. The boy hasn't come down yet. The binding doesn't apply to him, as Director Ragnarok noted, he's a minor. But he's been informed that the household has new rules. Griphook poured himself a cup of something dark and steaming from a pot on the counter. It smelled sharp and bitter, like coffee's angrier cousin. "He's adjusting. He's hiding," Ironclaw said. "Cried himself to sleep last night. I could hear him through the wall." Harry put down his fork. "I don't want Dudley to be scared." Ironclaw looked at him. "He spent 10 years making you scared." "I know. But he's 11. Same as me. And he did what his parents taught him to do." Harry picked up a strawberry and turned it in his fingers. "I'm not saying he's innocent. I'm saying he's a kid." Ironclaw and Griphook exchanged a look, the same look they'd exchanged last night when Harry had said he didn't want revenge. Harry was beginning to recognize it. It was the look of beings who had expected one thing and were getting another. "You are a peculiar wizard, Mr. Potter," Griphook said. "I'm not a wizard yet. I haven't done any magic. Not on purpose. You accepted a blood ward matrix last night with a touch. You lit up wards that have been dormant for a decade. Your magical core, even suppressed, reads stronger than most adult wizards." Griphook sipped his drink. "You are very much a wizard. You are simply an untrained one. Then train me." Another exchanged look. This one was different. Sharper. "Goblin magic and wizard magic are not the same," Griphook said carefully. "Wizards use wands. Goblins use runes, metals, and blood. There is some overlap, ward magic, for instance, which is fundamentally runic, but the core disciplines are different. We can teach you the goblin arts that your physiology allows, but for wand magic, you'll need wizard instruction. Like Hogwarts. Like Hogwarts, Griphook confirmed. Which brings us to a matter Director Ragnarok wanted to discuss with you this afternoon. But first, the healer. The healer arrived at exactly 9 o'clock. She came through the front door without knocking, the wards admitted her instantly, and she was not what Harry expected. She was old, even by Goblin standards, with white hair pulled back in a tight knot and hands that were wrinkled but absolutely steady, and she carried a case made of black metal that opened to reveal instruments Harry had never seen before, crystals on chains, vials of liquids that changed color when she shook them, thin metal rods etched with runes, and a pair of spectacles with lenses that shifted through different colors as she moved them. Sharp Fong, Griphook introduced. Senior healer at Gringotts, specialist in human magical physiology. She's treated wizards before, mostly curse breakers who got careless on the job. Sharp Fong looked Harry up and down with the colored spectacles, made a disgusted noise, and pointed at the kitchen table. Sit. Shirt off. Harry sat and pulled off his shirt. The kitchen went quiet. The bruises were old. Most of them were yellow-green, fading, but they mapped a history on his skin that was impossible to misread. The finger-shaped marks on his upper arm. The broad, flat bruise across his lower back where the edge of something, a belt, a hand, a door, had connected with force. The thinner lines on his shoulders that could have been anything but weren't. Sharpfang's expression didn't change. She was a professional. She set the colored spectacles on the table, picked up one of the crystal pendulums, and held it over Harry's chest. It swung in a slow circle, then faster, then changed direction entirely. Malnutrition. Chronic, long-term. Bone growth stunted by approximately 2 years, he should be taller than he is. Vitamin D deficiency, iron deficiency, calcium deficiency. 3 historical fractures, left wrist, 2 ribs on the right side. All healed, none healed properly. She moved the crystal lower. Magical core, significant. Very significant. And yes, suppressed. The ward matrix was pulling approximately 15% of his ambient magical output to sustain itself. That's been happening since he was 15 months old. She lowered the crystal. In simple terms, this child has been running at 85% of his magical capacity for his entire life, while simultaneously being physically weakened by nutritional neglect. The fact that he's functional, let alone reading at the magical levels I'm seeing, is remarkable. Can you fix it? Harry asked. Sharpfang gave him a look that, on a less terrifying face, might have been fondness. Boy, I've regrown limbs. I can fix you. She opened her case and began removing vials. This process will take several weeks. I'll start today with the critical deficiencies and the eyesight, yes, Griphook mentioned. Your magical core will begin recovering on its own now that the parasitic ward draw has been eliminated. I'll give you a regimen of potions for the physical damage. You'll need to eat properly, 3 full meals a day, minimum, plus snacks. Your body has a decade of growing to catch up on. She unstoppered the first vial. The liquid inside was a deep, shimmering gold. Skill Grow variant. Modified for pediatric use. This will address the bone density issues and correct the old fractures. It will itch. Don't scratch. Harry drank it. It tasted like chalk and lightning. The second vial was green. Nutritive base. Accelerates nutrient absorption. Take 1 dose morning and evening for 2 weeks. The third was clear and thin as water. Ocular correction. 1 dose, permanent effect. Your vision will blur for approximately 30 minutes while your eyes restructure, then clear. You won't need glasses again. Harry drank that too and the world immediately went soft and swimmy. He took off his glasses and set them on the table and blinked at the blur. 30 minutes. Give or take. Don't try to read anything in the meantime. And his core? Griphook asked. The suppression recovery, what should we expect? Sharpfang packed her instruments away with efficient movements. Accidental magic. Lots of it. His core is going to expand rapidly over the next few weeks as the suppression lifts. He'll need to burn off excess magical energy or it'll discharge unpredictably. Emotional triggers will be the worst: anger, fear, excitement. I recommend physical activity and, when he gets his wand, as much structured spell practice as possible. She closed her case and looked at Harry's blurred outline. You're going to feel things you haven't felt before, Mr. Potter. Your magic has been caged. Now it's free. The adjustment period will be energetic. She left. Harry sat at the kitchen table with his eyes closed, waiting for the ocular correction to finish its work, and listened to the house around him. The goblin carpenters working in the hallway. Ironclaw's boots on the floor upstairs, checking rooms. The distant sound of Vernon in the garden, the scrape of a trowel against packed earth. And underneath it all, the hum of the wards, his wards, steady and warm, like a second pulse. Grip hook. Mr. Potter. You said there was a briefing. On my family. I did. Would you prefer to wait until your eyesight, talk to me? I'll listen. A chair scraped. Griphook sat down across from him. Harry heard the satchel open, the rustle of parchment. The House of Potter, Griphook began, is one of the oldest wizarding families in Britain. The name appears in Goblin records as early as the 12th century, which predates most wizarding genealogies by several hundred years. The family's fortune was built over generations through a combination of political service, magical innovation, and strategic investment. Your grandfather, Fleamont Potter, invented the Sleek Easy's hair potion, still one of the highest-selling cosmetic products in the wizarding world, which quadrupled the family wealth in his lifetime. Hair potion, Harry said, touching his own untamable mess. The irony is not lost on the historical record. Harry could hear Griphook's thin smile. Fleamont and his wife Euphemia had one son, James, your father. James was, by all accounts, exceptionally talented, somewhat reckless, and deeply loyal to those he loved. He was a Gryffindor at Hogwarts. Head boy. Star Quidditch player, chaser. What's Quidditch? Griphook made a sound that might have been a sigh. A wizard sport played on broomsticks. Goblins consider it frivolous. Your father considered it a religion. We'll come back to that. And my mum? Lily Evans. Muggle-born, meaning she was a witch born to non-magical parents. Petunia Evans, your aunt, is her older sister. Lily was, by every academic metric available, the most gifted witch of her generation. Top marks in every subject. Particularly brilliant in charms and potions. She was recruited by the Order of the Phoenix, a resistance group led by Albus Dumbledore, during the First War against the Dark Lord Voldemort. Voldemort. The name landed strange on Harry's tongue. That's who killed them. Yes. On October 31, 1981, Voldemort attacked your family home in Godric's Hollow. He killed James first. Then Lily. Then he turned his wand on you. Griphook paused. And failed. Harry opened his eyes. The world was still blurry but sharpening, shapes were resolving, colors deepening, and he could make out Griphook's face across the table, those dark eyes watching him with an intensity that went beyond professional interest. No one knows exactly what happened, Griphook continued. Voldemort's killing curse, the Avada Kedavra, an unblockable, unsurvivable spell, struck you and rebounded. Voldemort's body was destroyed. You survived with nothing but that scar. He gestured toward Harry's forehead. The wizarding world calls you the boy who lived. You are, in their eyes, the only person to have ever survived the killing curse. You are famous, Mr. Potter. Profoundly, inconveniently famous. Harry's vision cleared. It happened all at once, like wiping condensation off a window, the blur collapsed into razor-sharp focus, and suddenly he could see everything. The grain of the wood table. The individual threads in Griphook's suit. The veins on a leaf of the plant on the windowsill. He looked at Griphook and saw him clearly for the first time, the sharp angles of his face, the intelligence in those black eyes, the faint scars on his hands that spoke of a life that went beyond banking. "I'm famous," Harry said, "and I didn't know my own name meant anything until yesterday." "Yes. Because Dumbledore wanted it that way. That is the Goblin assessment, yes." Harry looked at the table. At the empty plate from breakfast. At the vial Sharp Fong had left behind. At his own hands, clean now, no dirt under the nails, resting on a table he'd never been allowed to sit at. "Tell me about Dumbledore," he said. "Everything." Griphook told him. Not in the breathless, reverent tones of the wizarding world, but in the precise, measured language of a banker presenting an audit. Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts, supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, chief warlock of the Wizengamot. The man who defeated the dark wizard Grindelwald in 1945. The leader of the Order of the Phoenix. The only wizard Voldemort ever feared. "He is brilliant," Griphook said, "and he is powerful, and he has done genuine good in the world. The goblins do not deny this. But he is also a man who believes, with absolute, unshakable conviction, that he knows what's best for everyone. He placed you here without consulting us. He redirected Potter funds without authorization. He installed monitoring charms on this house that reported to him and him alone. He named himself your magical guardian without the consent of the Goblin Nation, despite our legal standing as your family's financial stewards. Why didn't you stop him?" Griphook hesitated. It was the first time Harry had seen him hesitate. "Because we didn't know," he admitted. "The guardianship filing was buried in ministry records we didn't have access to. The property connection was obscured by Dumbledore's ward modifications. He layered his blood ward over the Potter ward so thickly that our standard detection methods couldn't distinguish them. The monthly stipend was established through a Muggle banking channel that bypassed our usual oversight." He set his jaw. "We were outmaneuvered, Mr. Potter. By a wizard we underestimated. Director Ragnarok has not forgiven himself for this, and he will not do so until the account is fully rectified." A bang from upstairs. Then a crash, the sound of something heavy falling, and Dudley's voice, high-pitched, panicked. It moved. The thing on the wall moved. Ironclaw's voice, calm and faintly amused, "That's a security rune, child. It monitors for threats. You're not a threat. Stop screaming." It looked at me. "Runes don't have eyes. It sensed your movement. Now go downstairs and eat your breakfast before I decide you are a threat and activate the countermeasures." The sound of Dudley's feet pounding down the stairs. He burst into the kitchen, saw Harry sitting at the table, and skidded to a halt. He was still wearing his normal clothes, a too-tight t-shirt and jeans, and his face was swollen from crying. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. "There's bacon," Harry said. "And eggs." Dudley stared at him as though Harry had spoken in tongues. Then, cautiously, like an animal approaching a trap, he moved to the counter where Petunia had left a plate for him. He took it to the small kitchen table by the window, the one Harry used to eat at, standing up, and sat down and began to eat in silence, shooting glances at Harry every few seconds. Petunia appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at Dudley, then at Harry, and something complicated moved across her face. "He can eat in the dining room," Harry said. "Dudley. He's not a servant." Petunia's eyes filled. She blinked rapidly and turned away. "Thank you," she whispered, and disappeared back into the hallway. Griphook watched all of this with the expression of someone cataloging data. "Shall I continue the briefing?" "In a minute." Harry looked at Dudley, who was hunched over his bacon like someone was going to take it away. "Dudley." Dudley flinched. Same flinch Harry used to have. Still had, sometimes. Seeing it from the outside was strange, ugly and familiar. I'm not going to hurt you, Harry said. Nobody here is going to hurt you. But things are different now. You understand that? Dudley nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. Good. Eat your breakfast. And don't touch the runes on the walls. Dudley ate his breakfast. Harry turned back to Griphook. Continue. Griphook continued. He talked about the Wizengamot, the Wizarding Parliament, and the Potter family's hereditary seat, which had been proxied to Dumbledore since James's death. He talked about the political factions, the old pureblood families who believed magical blood should be kept pure. Griphook's lip curled at the word, the progressives who supported Muggle-born rights, and the vast, inert middle that followed whoever seemed most powerful at any given moment. He talked about the Ministry of Magic, a bureaucracy in the truest and worst sense of the word, and its current minister, Cornelius Fudge, whom Griphook described as a man whose primary skill is facing whichever direction the wind is blowing. He talked about Voldemort. About the war. About the Death Eaters, Voldemort's followers, many of whom had avoided prison by claiming they'd been under mind control. The Imperious Defense, Griphook said with undisguised contempt. Dozens of wealthy purebloods suddenly remembered they'd been magically compelled after Voldemort fell. The Ministry accepted this, because the alternative was prosecuting half the aristocracy. Are they still out there? The Death Eaters? Some are in Azkaban, the wizarding prison. Others walk free. Lucius Malfoy, for instance, is currently one of the most influential voices on the Wizengamot. He was a known Death Eater who bought his way to freedom with gold and a very convincing performance of remorse. Griphook's expression suggested he found the performance about as convincing as a goblin found wizard architecture. He has a son your age. Draco. You'll likely meet him at Hogwarts. And Voldemort himself? You said his body was destroyed. Not that he died. Griphook went very still. That is an astute distinction, Mr. Potter. Is he dead or not? The official position of the Ministry of Magic is that Voldemort was destroyed on the night he attacked your family. The official position of Gringotts. Griphook looked at Harry with those dark, unreadable eyes. The official position of Gringotts is that certain accounts associated with Voldemort's known aliases have not entered probate. In goblin banking, an account that has not entered probate belongs to a living client. The air in the kitchen felt colder. He's alive, Harry said. We believe so. In what form, we don't know. Director Ragnarok has dedicated considerable resources to the question. Griphook closed his notebook. This is one of the reasons we moved when we did, Mr. Potter. Your safety is not merely a matter of contractual obligation. If Voldemort returns, when he returns, you will be a target. Dumbledore knows this. It's why he wanted you hidden, ignorant, dependent on his protection. We intend to ensure you are none of those things. Harry sat with that. He let it fill the space in his chest where fear might have gone, and found that it didn't convert to fear. It converted to something harder, something with edges. Not anger. Determination. The same cold, clear-headed focus that had gotten him through 10 years of the Dursleys, the ability to look at a bad situation, assess it, and decide what to do next without wasting time on panic. Then I need to learn everything, Harry said. Magic, politics, finance, history. Everything I should have known already. How much time do I have before Hogwarts? Griphook glanced at a calendar on the kitchen wall, Petunia's calendar, with its pictures of English gardens and its notations of Dudley's dental appointments and Vernon's golf dates. Term starts September 1st. That gives us roughly 5 weeks. Then we'd better not waste them. They didn't. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of information and transformation. Griphook became Harry's shadow, arriving every morning at 8, departing every evening at 9, filling every hour between with knowledge. History of the wizarding world. Goblin customs and law. Magical theory, how spells worked, what wands did, why magical creatures were classified the way they were. Economics, How the galleon sickle canute system operated, how the Potter investments were structured, what it meant to be a shareholder in the Flu Network Authority or the Daily Prophet or the 12 other enterprises that the Potter fortune had stakes in. Harry absorbed it like dry earth absorbing rain. Griphook noticed. "You have an extraordinary memory," he said on the third day, after Harry had recited back the complete structure of the Wisengamot from a single reading. "I had to remember a lot of things to stay safe," Harry said. Which days Vernon came home early. Which moods meant trouble. Where to hide when Dudley's gang was out. Memory was survival. Griphook said nothing for a moment. Then he added a note to his file and moved on. Ironclaw handled security and physical training. Not combat, not yet, but conditioning. She had Harry running laps around the back garden at dawn, doing push-ups and sit-ups and stretches that she said were adapted from Goblin warrior training. Goblin recruits start at age 5, she told him, jogging backward in front of him without apparent effort while he gasped his way through his 4th lap. By the time they're your age, they can run for 6 hours without stopping. You're behind, but you have potential. Your frame is slight but your endurance is surprising. Years of running from Dudley, Harry panted. See. Every experience has value. She also taught him about the security infrastructure she'd installed. The ward matrix was now fully Goblin-controlled. Dumbledore's blood ward had been stripped away and replaced with something Ironclaw described as, actually competent. The new wards monitored for magical signatures, blocked unauthorized apparition and portkey travel within a half-mile radius, and could identify any magical being that crossed the property line. The 2 guards in the front garden rotated in 8-hour shifts. There were 2 more in the back that Harry hadn't noticed. The house itself had been fitted with Goblin security runes on every door, window, and wall, the runes that had frightened Dudley, which were essentially magical motion sensors that could distinguish between residents, authorized visitors, and threats. "What happens if they detect a threat?" Harry asked. Ironclaw smiled her terrible smile. "Would you like a demonstration?" "Maybe later." Smart boy. The house continued to change. The Goblin carpenters finished the hallway reconstruction, replacing the cupboard space with a beautiful built-in bookshelf of dark wood that glowed faintly with runic protection. They refurbished the master bedroom with furniture from the Potter vault, a desk that had belonged to Harry's grandfather, a wardrobe that expanded magically to accommodate whatever was placed inside it, a mirror that had the unsettling habit of offering fashion advice. They converted Dudley's second bedroom, the one that had been full of broken toys and unused exercise equipment, into a study for Harry, lined with shelves and fitted with a Goblin-made lamp that adjusted its brightness based on the reader's eye strain. The Dursleys existed in a strange purgatory. Vernon weeded the garden, cleaned the gutters, washed the car, mopped floors, scrubbed bathrooms, cooked when Petunia couldn't, all the tasks that had been Harry's, now his. He did them with a silence that was more unnerving than his old bluster. The rage was still there, Harry could see it in the set of his jaw, the white of his knuckles, the way he gripped the mop handle like he wanted to break it over someone's head, but the binding held. Whatever Goblin magic had been woven into Vernon Dursley on that first night, it prevented him from refusing a direct instruction, from raising his hand against Harry or any of the Goblins, and from leaving the property without permission. On the second day, Vernon tested it. Harry was in the study with Griphook, going over a map of Diagon Alley, when they heard the front door open and Vernon's heavy footsteps on the path. Then a sound, not a shout, more like a grunt of surprise and discomfort, and the footsteps stopped. Harry went to the window and looked down. Vernon was standing at the property line, 1 foot on the pavement beyond the ward boundary and 1 foot on the garden path, and he was frozen. Not magically, it wasn't that dramatic. He simply couldn't make himself take another step. The binding was pulling at him, a gentle but absolute pressure, like a hand on his shoulder that wouldn't let go. Vernon stood there for a long time. Then he turned around and walked back inside and picked up the mop. That evening, Harry found Petunia in the kitchen. She was sitting at the small table by the window, the one Harry used to eat at, and she was holding a cup of tea that had gone cold. She wasn't crying. She was past crying. She just looked, emptied. Harry pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Petunia stiffened. Do you need something? No. I want to talk to you. She looked at him. Really looked at him, not the dismissive, resentful glance he'd gotten for 10 years, but an actual, searching look, as though she was seeing him for the first time and finding something she hadn't expected. You look like him, she said. James. But your eyes are my mother's. I know. Griphook showed me photographs. Petunia flinched at the word mother. Lily. Tell me about her. What? My mom. Tell me about her. Not the wizard stuff, Griphook's covered that. Tell me about her as a person. As your sister. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Vernon was doing something in the garden. Harry could hear the rhythmic scrape of a rake. Upstairs, Dudley was in his room, where he spent most of his time now, emerging only for meals. Petunia's hands tightened around the cold cup. She was better than me, she said. At everything. Always. She was prettier, she was cleverer, she was kinder. Even before the magic, before that Snape boy came and told her what she was more. More alive. More there. When she walked into a room, you felt it. Not magic. Just Lily. Her voice had taken on a quality Harry had never heard in it before. Not bitterness, though bitterness was the topsoil. Underneath was something rawer. Grief. Old, compressed grief, so packed down and buried that it had fossilized into resentment. I wanted to go too, Petunia said. To Hogwarts. I wrote to Dumbledore when I was 12. I begged him to let me attend. He wrote back a very kind letter explaining that it wasn't possible, that I didn't have magic, that I should be proud of my sister. She laughed. It was a horrible sound. Be proud. Of the sister who got everything, the magic, the adventure, the special school, the brilliant future, while I got nothing. While I sat in a normal school in a normal town and watched her come home every summer with stories I couldn't be part of. You were jealous, Harry said. Not accusatory. Just factual. I was destroyed. Petunia set down the cup. You don't know what it's like. To watch someone you love become something you can never be. To feel the world choose them and reject you, not because of anything you did wrong, but because of something you were born without. She met his eyes. I hated her for it. Not always. Not every day. But enough. And when she died, she stopped. Her jaw worked. Harry waited. I was relieved, she whispered. God help me, part of me was relieved, because it was over. The magic was over. The threat was over. I could be normal. I could have a normal life. And then they left you on my doorstep and it wasn't over, it was never going to be over, and you had her eyes and his face and every time I looked at you I saw everything I'd lost and everything I'd never had and she put her hand over her mouth. Harry sat in the silence. He let it breathe. He was 10 years old and he was learning, in this kitchen, that the story of his life was also the story of other people's wounds, and that understanding those wounds didn't excuse them but it made them comprehensible, and comprehensible was better than the formless, nameless cruelty he'd grown up with. You could have been kind to me, he said finally. You could have taken the money and used it for me and given me a bedroom and told me the truth, and I would have loved you for it. I would have been so grateful for even a fraction of what Dudley got. Petunia's hand was still over her mouth. Above it, her eyes were wet. I know, she said behind her fingers. I know that. But you didn't. No. Harry stood up. I don't hate you, Aunt Petunia. I think I should. But I don't. I just feel sorry for you, and I feel sorry for me, and I'm tired of both. He pushed his chair in. If you want, you can tell me more about my mum. Some other time. When you're ready. He left her in the kitchen. On his way through the hallway, he passed the new bookshelf where the cupboard had been, and the wood hummed gently as he touched it, warm and alive and pleased. The days kept coming. Sharpfang's potions were working. Harry could feel it in the way his bones ached as they restructured, in the way his appetite exploded so that he was eating 4 meals a day and still hungry, in the way his trousers needed lengthening after just 5 days because he was growing, his body finally given permission and resources to do what it had been trying to do for years. His eyesight was perfect. Better than perfect, sharper than any humans had a right to be, Sharpfang said, because the correction had interacted with his magical core and enhanced the result. He could read small print from across a room. He could see individual blades of grass from the upstairs window. And his magic. Oh, his magic. It started on the 3rd morning, when Harry was reaching for a glass on a high shelf in the kitchen and it flew into his hand. Not fell, flew. It leaped off the shelf and sailed through the air and landed in his palm with a gentle smack, as if it had wanted to come to him, as if the distance between them was an inconvenience it couldn't be bothered to maintain. Accidental magic, Griphook said from the table, not looking up from his ledger. It's beginning. It didn't stop. Over the next week, Harry's magic bled into everything. Doors opened before he reached them. Lights brightened when he entered a room and dimmed when he left. The goblin-treated wood throughout the house seemed to lean toward him, the bookshelves angling their contents into easier reach, the desk chair adjusting itself to his posture without being asked. Once, in the garden during one of Ironclaw's training sessions, Harry tripped over a root and threw his hands out to catch himself and a gust of raw magic blasted outward from his palms and cratered a 2-foot hole in the lawn. Ironclaw looked at the crater. Then at Harry. I think, she said thoughtfully, that when you get a wand, I'd like to be very far away. Sorry, don't apologize. That was impressive. Uncontrolled, completely unstructured, and it still punched a hole in goblin-warded earth. Your core is expanding faster than Sharpfang predicted. She crouched by the crater and touched the edge. Do you know what a goblin warrior would give for raw power like this? It scared me a little, Harry admitted. Good. That means you respect it. Fear isn't weakness, it's intelligence. The warriors who aren't scared of their own strength are the ones who end up hurting the people around them. She stood and brushed dirt off her knees. You need a wand, Mr. Potter. Soon. Without a focus, your magic is going to keep discharging randomly, and while I enjoy the landscaping improvements, the next time it happens you might take out a wall instead of a garden. On the morning of July 28, 3 days before his birthday, Director Ragnarok returned. He arrived in the iron-bound carriage, as before, and swept into the house with the energy of someone who had been doing things that displeased him and was ready to do things that pleased him instead. He settled into the armchair in the sitting room, his chair, he'd claimed it, and even Harry didn't argue, and accepted a cup of the dark goblin drink from Griphook and looked at Harry over the rim of it. You've grown, he said. 1.5 inches in 4 days. Sharpfang says I should reach normal height for my age by the end of August. Good. You'll need to look the part. Ragnarok set down the cup. There are developments. Several, in fact, and none of them simple. Griphook took up position by the window with his ledger. Ironclaw leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Harry sat on the sofa across from Ragnarok and waited. First, Ragnarok said. Dumbledore. His monitoring charms on this property failed the night we arrived, Ironclaw's ward modifications saw to that. For the first 2 days, he appeared to believe it was a malfunction. On the 3rd day, he sent an owl. The owl could not penetrate the wards and returned to him with the letter undelivered. On the 4th day, he sent Minerva McGonagall. Who's she? Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts. Transfiguration Professor. A formidable witch and, this is relevant, one of the few members of Dumbledore's inner circle with genuine integrity. Ragnarok's expression suggested he didn't hand out that compliment often. She arrived at the ward boundary yesterday morning. Ironclaw's perimeter team intercepted her. I had a very pleasant conversation with her, Ironclaw said. She was surprised to find goblins guarding a house in Surrey. She was more surprised when I explained why. You told her? Harry asked. In broad terms. That the property was Potter land, that you were under goblin protection, and that Dumbledore's arrangement had been dissolved. Ironclaw's grin was sharp. She went very quiet. Then she went very angry. Then she left, and I strongly suspect she went directly to Dumbledore to give him the most unpleasant conversation of his very long life. McGonagall is not our enemy, Ragnock said. She is, if anything, a potential ally, though her loyalty to Dumbledore is deep and should not be underestimated. The point is that Dumbledore now knows. He knows we're here, he knows what we've done, and he is, I guarantee you, already devising a strategy to reverse it. Can he? No. Ragnock said it flatly, without equivocation. The Potter wards are anchored to Potter blood. The binding on the Dursleys is sealed by Goblin treaty magic. The property title is registered with Gringotts and is non-contestable under the Treaty of 1743. The only thing Dumbledore can challenge is the guardianship, and to do that, he'd have to go before the Wisengamot and publicly admit that he placed a child in an unauthorized living arrangement and failed to ensure the proper use of Potter funds for 10 years. A thin, cold smile. He won't do that. It would destroy his reputation. So he'll do what he always does, he'll try to work around it. He'll try to get to you directly. To convince you, personally, that you need him more than you need us. He can try, Harry said. Ragnock studied him. He'll offer things. Knowledge, protection, answers about your parents, about Voldemort, about the scar. He'll make himself seem indispensable. It's how he operates, he becomes the only source of the things you need, and then you can never leave his orbit. Then I need to have other sources, Harry said. For everything. The look that crossed Ragnock's face was one Harry would remember for years. It was recognition. Not the ward matrix kind, the personal kind. The old goblin was looking at Harry and seeing something he'd seen before, in other faces, in other centuries, the raw material of someone who would matter. The second development, Ragnock said, the moment passing. Your Hogwarts letter arrived 3 days ago. We intercepted it at the ward boundary. Griphook produced an envelope from his satchel. Thick parchment, green ink, a wax seal bearing a crest, a lion, a serpent, an eagle, a badger, around a large letter H. Harry took it and turned it over. On the front, in emerald ink, Mr. H. Potter, the master bedroom number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. It updated, Harry said, looking at the address. Hogwarts letters are charmed to reflect the recipient's current sleeping location, Griphook said. It's been updating every night since you moved to the master bedroom. The Hogwarts quill that records magical children is one of the most sensitive detection instruments in existence. Harry opened the letter. He read it through. The language was formal: acceptance to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, term beginning September 1st, please find enclosed a list of required books and equipment. Students may also bring an owl or a cat or a toad. I want to go, Harry said. We expected that, Ragnock said. And we don't oppose it. Hogwarts, for all Dumbledore's influence over it, remains the best school of magic in Europe. You'll need formal training, and there is no better place to receive it. However. He raised a gnarled finger. We have conditions. Go on. First. Griphook will remain your primary liaison with Gringotts. He will be available by Goblin Communication Mirror at all times, will provide you with one. Any financial, legal, or political matter that arises will go through him. Dumbledore is not your guardian. No document he produces will be valid without Gringotts' countersignature. Agreed. Second. Ironclaw will not accompany you to Hogwarts. The wards there do not permit non-staff residents, but she will maintain a security presence at the school's perimeter. Goblin scouts, rotating shifts. If you are in danger, we will know. Agreed. Third. You will receive supplementary education from Gringotts in areas that Hogwarts does not cover: goblin history, treaty law, financial management, political strategy, and, when you are ready, combat magic that the Hogwarts curriculum has not taught in 200 years. Harry's eyes sharpened. Combat magic? Hogwarts teaches defense against the dark arts as an academic subject. Gringotts employs cursebreakers who operate in the field. There is a significant difference between studying a venomous snake from a textbook and facing one in a tomb at 3 in the morning. Ragnarok finished his drink. You'll learn both. Agreed. Fourth, and this is non-negotiable. Ragnarok leaned forward. When Dumbledore summons you to his office, and he will, early and often, you will hear him out. You will be respectful. You will be polite. And you will give him absolutely nothing he doesn't earn. No trust that isn't verified. No information that doesn't serve your interests. He is the headmaster of a school you are choosing to attend, not the architect of your life. Are we clear? Crystal. Ragnarok sat back. Then we go to Diagon Alley tomorrow. You need a wand, books, robes, and, the corner of his mouth twitched, whatever pet appeals to you, I suppose. An owl might be useful. An owl is a security risk. Messages can be intercepted. We'll discuss alternatives. Director. Harry hesitated, then pressed on. You said Dumbledore would try to get to me directly. What if he tries to get to the Dursleys instead? Uses them to undermine the binding somehow? Ragnarok and Griphook exchanged one of their looks. This one was impressed. The binding is magically absolute, Griphook said. But your concern about Dumbledore attempting to use them as pawns is well-founded. The man is creative. Then we need the Dursleys on our side. Or at least not actively working against us. Ironclaw snorted from the doorway. You want to win over the people who locked you in a cupboard? No. I want them to understand that their best chance, their only chance, at any kind of decent life is to cooperate fully. Fear works short-term. Griphook told me that. Understanding works longer. I told you that on the second day, Griphook said. You were referring to Goblin military strategy. It applies here too. There was a silence. Then Ragnarok laughed, a real laugh, deep and rough, the kind that shook his whole body. Fleamont would have liked you, he said. Your grandfather. He was the same way, soft voice, steel spine, and an understanding of leverage that would make a goblin weep. You knew my grandfather? For 70 years. He was the last wizard to sit in this chair and share a drink with me. Ragnarok's eyes softened, not much, just a degree, but on a face that angular, it was visible. I failed him. I failed your father. I failed you. 10 years, Mr. Potter. 10 years I didn't know. That shame lives in me like a splinter and it will stay there until the debt is paid. You're here now, Harry said. That matters more. Ragnarok held his gaze. Then he inclined his head in the smallest, most significant bow Harry had ever seen. A bow between equals. An acknowledgement. They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing for Diagon Alley. Griphook walked Harry through the logistics. They'd enter through the Leaky Cauldron, the pub that served as the gateway between Muggle London and the magical shopping district. They'd go to Gringotts first, then Ollivander's for a wand, then the rest of the supplies. Ironclaw would accompany them with a personal guard of 4 warriors. The goal was efficiency, not tourism. People will recognize you, Griphook warned. The scar. The name. You will be stared at, approached, possibly mobbed. The wizarding public treats you as a celebrity. For something I did as a baby. That I don't even remember. Fame rarely has anything to do with merit. You'll learn that. That evening, after Ragnarok departed and the house settled into its nighttime rhythms, Harry sat in his study and read. Griphook had provided him with a small library's worth of material, history books, etiquette guides, a who's who of the Wizengamot, a primer on magical law, and a slim, leather-bound volume titled The Goblin Perspective, a history of wizard-goblin relations, written by someone who was actually there. It was, Griphook said, the most accurate account of goblin history ever published, and it had been banned by the Ministry of Magic 3 times. Harry read until the magical lamp dimmed itself gently to signal that it was getting late, and then he set down the book and went to the window. The garden was silver in the moonlight. The goblin guards stood at their posts, motionless, patient. Beyond the ward boundary, Privet Drive slept. Normal houses. Normal people. Normal lives that had no idea what was happening at number 4. Tomorrow he'd enter the wizarding world for the first time. Not as a lost boy. Not as a pawn. As Harry Potter, the last of his name, armed with knowledge and backed by the Goblin Nation, walking into a world that had celebrated him and abandoned him in equal measure. He wasn't nervous. He probably should have been. But somewhere in the last 4 days, between the training and the briefings and the meals he'd finally been allowed to eat and the bed he'd finally been allowed to sleep in and the photograph of his parents that he looked at every night before he closed his eyes, somewhere in all of that, Harry had crossed a line. Not from fear to courage. From powerlessness to agency. He knew who he was now. He knew what had been done to him and why. And he knew, with a calm that went all the way to the bottom of him, that no one would ever lock him in a cupboard again. Not Dumbledore. Not Voldemort. Not anyone. A knock at the study door. Soft. Hesitant. Come in. The door opened. Dudley stood there in his pajamas, his face blotchy and uncertain, clutching something in his hand. He looked at Harry the way a dog looks at a person it's not sure about, wary but wanting. I found this, Dudley said. In Mum's room. I don't know if you want it. He held out his hand. In it was a photograph. Not a magical one, a normal, Muggle photograph, static and faded. 2 girls, maybe 8 and 10, standing in a garden. The younger one had red hair and a gap-toothed smile and her arm around the older one's waist. The older one was thinner, less vivid, and she was smiling too, but hers was the smile of someone standing in the shade of someone else's light. Lily and Petunia. Before Hogwarts. Before magic. Before everything went wrong. Harry took the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. His mother's face, younger than he'd ever seen it, beaming at a camera that someone, their parents, his grandparents, had held in a garden that no longer existed, in a time when 2 sisters were just 2 sisters and the world hadn't yet divided them. Thank you, Dudley, he said. Dudley shuffled his feet. I'm sorry, he blurted. About, the cupboard, and, hitting you, and, I didn't, I know. Dad always said, I know what he said. Harry put the photograph next to the magical one on his desk. The 2 images sat side by side, Lily and Petunia as children, Lily and James as parents. A bridge between 2 worlds. You're not your dad, Dudley. You can be different if you want to be. Dudley stood in the doorway and looked at his cousin, really looked at him, the way Petunia had in the kitchen, and whatever he saw must have been confusing, because Dudley's face went through several expressions before settling on something raw and uncertain and painfully young. Okay, Dudley said. Just that. Then he turned and went back to his room and closed the door. Harry sat with the 2 photographs and the quiet hum of the wards and the distant sound of Ironclaw checking the perimeter, and he thought about how strange it was that the worst people in your life could also be the most complicated, and how the world was bigger and darker and stranger than he'd ever imagined, and how tomorrow he was going to walk into it with his eyes wide open. He put the photographs away. He closed his books. He went to bed. The wards pulsed. The house breathed. The guards stood watch. Tomorrow, Diagon Alley. Tomorrow, the wizarding world would meet Harry Potter. He intended to make an impression. Chapter 3, Diagon Alley and the Declaration. The morning of July 29 dawned grey and wet, a proper English summer rain drumming against the windows of number 4, Privet Drive. Harry was awake before it started. He'd been awake since 5, lying in bed with his hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling and running through everything Griphook had told him about Diagon Alley until the route, the names, and the tactical considerations were second nature. He showered, dressed in the clothes the Goblin tailor had delivered 2 days earlier, dark trousers, a fitted jacket in charcoal with the Potter crest stitched small and precise on the inside of the left cuff, a white shirt, boots that were softer than anything he'd ever worn and gripped the floor like they'd been grown rather than made. The tailor had wanted to put the crest on the outside of the jacket. Harry had said no. "I'm not advertising," he'd told Griphook. "Not yet. Let them figure it out themselves." Griphook had smiled at that. The thin, approving smile that Harry was learning to read as high praise. Downstairs, the house was already moving. Petunia had breakfast on the table: eggs, bacon, toast, a bowl of porridge with honey, orange juice, and a plate of sliced fruit. She set it out without being asked, which was new. For the first 2 days, every task had required explicit instruction, the binding compelled obedience to direct orders but didn't generate initiative. Petunia was starting to anticipate. Whether that was survival instinct or something more genuine, Harry couldn't tell. Vernon was scrubbing the kitchen floor on his hands and knees. He didn't look up when Harry entered. He hadn't looked directly at Harry in 3 days, not since the morning Harry had come down for breakfast and Vernon had been standing by the back door with a kitchen knife in his hand, not moving, just standing there gripping it with white knuckles, and the binding had seized him so hard he dropped to his knees and the knife had clattered across the tiles. Ironclaw had been there in seconds. She hadn't drawn her weapons. She just looked at Vernon with those black eyes and said, very quietly, "Try that again and I won't stop you. The wards will. And they won't be as gentle as I am." Vernon hadn't picked up a knife since. He ate with a spoon. Harry sat down and ate his breakfast. Ironclaw was already in the hallway, buckling on her sword belt with the economical movements of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. She was wearing lighter armor today, leather over chain rather than full plate, and she'd added a hooded cloak that hung to her knees. "Urban deployment," she said, catching Harry's look. "Full armor draws too much attention in the alley. The cloak is enchanted, it'll blur my silhouette to anyone not looking directly at me. The guard detail will be similarly equipped." "How many?" "4, plus me. 2 visible, 2 concealed. Griphook makes 6 in the party. We'll enter through the leaky cauldron, proceed directly to Gringotts, and work outward from there." She pulled the cloak's hood up and for a moment her outline shimmered and softened, like a heat haze, before snapping back into focus. "The rain's useful. People keep their heads down." Griphook arrived at 7:30, stepping through the front door with his leather satchel and an expression that sat somewhere between professional focus and barely contained anticipation. "Good morning, Mr. Potter. Ready?" "I've been ready since 5. "Then let's not waste daylight." He paused. "Or the lack thereof. This weather is quite something." They left through the front door. The rain was steady and cool and Harry tilted his face up into it for a moment, letting it hit his skin, feeling the wards hum as he crossed the threshold. He could feel them now without trying, the boundary of the property like a second skin, warm and aware, stretching from the house to the garden walls and out to the pavement where the shimmer marked the edge. When he stepped past it, the warmth dimmed but didn't disappear entirely. It lingered, like a hand on his shoulder. The carriage was waiting. Same iron-bound vehicle, same invisible horses, or whatever pulled it. Harry climbed in and found the interior larger than the exterior suggested, with upholstered benches and a small table bolted to the floor. Griphook and Ironclaw took the opposite bench. The 4 guard goblins, Harry recognized none of them from the house detail, arranged themselves 2 inside and 2 on a running board at the rear, visible through a small window. The carriage moved. There was no lurch, no sense of acceleration, the view through the windows simply changed, Privet Drive sliding away and being replaced by streets Harry didn't recognize, then a motorway, then the outskirts of London, all moving past at a speed that didn't match the smooth, stationary feeling inside the cabin. Spatial compression, Griphook said. The carriage moves through folded space. We'll be in London in approximately 8 minutes. Wizards use the Fleur network or apparition, Ironclaw added. Both are faster. Both are also monitored by the Ministry. Goblin spatial compression is not. We don't advertise the capability, Griphook said. The Ministry doesn't know. We'd prefer to keep it that way. Harry filed that away. Another advantage. Another card to hold. London materialized outside the windows, rain-slicked streets, red buses, the grey sprawl of buildings. The carriage slowed and stopped in what appeared to be a narrow side street off Charing Cross Road. Griphook opened the door and stepped out, umbrella already open, a black umbrella with a silver handle shaped like a goblin fist, which Harry suspected was not purely decorative. They walked. Griphook led, Harry beside him, Ironclaw a half-step behind, the guards moving in pairs ahead and behind with the fluid, invisible competence of professionals. The rain kept pedestrians hurrying with their heads down, and no one spared a second glance at the small, odd-looking group making its way down Charing Cross Road. Griphook stopped in front of a pub. Harry looked at it. It was wedged between a bookshop and a record store, and it was the dingiest, most forgettable building on the street. The paint was peeling. The sign above the door read The Leaky Cauldron in letters so faded they were nearly invisible. Muggles walked past it without a glance, their eyes sliding off the facade as though it simply didn't register. Doesn't look like much, Harry said. It's not supposed to, Griphook said. Concealment through mediocrity. The wizarding world's entire relationship with the Muggle world is built on the principle that humans won't look twice at anything sufficiently boring. He pushed the door open. After you, Mr. Potter. The Leaky Cauldron was dark, smoky, and surprisingly busy for 8:30 on a rainy morning. Wizards and witches hunched over tables, nursing drinks that steamed and bubbled in ways no Muggle beverage would. Candles floated near the ceiling. A wireless in the corner played something that sounded like a harpsichord being attacked by angry fairies. The bartender, a bald man with a gap-toothed smile, was polishing glasses behind a bar that had been polished smooth by centuries of elbows. Griphook moved through the pub without pausing, heading for the back. A few heads turned. Goblins in the Leaky Cauldron weren't unusual, given the proximity to Diagon Alley, but a goblin in a banker's suit with an armed escort drew attention. Harry kept his head up and his expression neutral and walked. They almost made it through. Bless my soul, the bartender said, leaning over the bar, his eyes going wide. Is that, it can't be, Harry Potter. The pub went quiet. Every head turned. Every eye found Harry. Harry stopped walking. He could feel it, the weight of attention, dozens of gazes pressing against him like physical things. Griphook had warned him about this. The scar. The glasses, no, he didn't have glasses anymore, but the scar was there, visible under his fringe, and someone had already spotted it. A witch at a nearby table gasped. Harry Potter. It is him. Chairs scraped. People stood. A wave of movement rippled through the pub as wizards and witches who had been minding their own business seconds ago suddenly became a crowd with a single focus. They pressed forward, hands outstretched, voices overlapping. Mr. Potter, it's an honor, welcome back, I'm Doris Crockford, Mr. Potter, I can't believe I'm meeting you at last, Daedalus Diggle, Mr. Potter, we met once before, I bowed to you in a shop, Ironclaw's hand moved to her sword hilt. Harry caught the movement from the corner of his eye and gave a tiny shake of his head. Not yet. He turned to face the crowd. He didn't step back. He let them see him, small, thin, well-dressed, standing between a goblin banker and a goblin warrior in the middle of the Leaky Cauldron, and he smiled. Not the automatic, please don't hit me smile he'd learned at the Dursleys. A real one. Controlled and calm. Thank you, he said. His voice carried the way Ragnar's did, not loud, but clear, with a quality that made people shut up and listen. He didn't know where that quality came from. It just appeared when he needed it. It's nice to meet you all. I'm afraid I can't stay, I have business at Gringotts this morning. But thank you. The crowd wavered. They wanted more. They wanted to shake his hand, touch his shoulder, tell him where they'd been the night Voldemort fell. But something in the way Harry stood, the straightness of his spine, the directness of his gaze, the goblins flanking him, created a space around him that most of them didn't quite dare to cross. A man in a purple turban didn't get the message. He pushed through the crowd with a nervous, stuttering energy, one hand extended. Mr. Potter, what an honor, I'm Professor Quirrell, I'll be teaching defense against the dark arts at Hogwarts this year. Harry took his hand automatically, and pain lanced through his scar. It was sharp and sudden, a white-hot needle driven through his forehead from the outside in. Harry's vision whited out for a fraction of a second and something flashed behind his eyes, not a memory, not exactly, more like a signal, a burst of static from a frequency he shouldn't have been able to receive. Cold. Malice. Something vast and dark pressing against a barrier that was paper-thin. Harry let go of Quirrell's hand. The pain vanished. Quirrell was still smiling his nervous, twitchy smile. Very pleased to meet you, Mr. Potter. Likewise, Professor. Harry's voice was steady but his pulse was hammering. He glanced at Ironclaw. She'd noticed, her eyes were narrowed, locked on Quirrell with a predator's focus. They moved on. Through the back of the pub, into a small courtyard, where Griphook tapped a specific pattern on the brick wall and the bricks rearranged themselves into an archway that opened onto Diagon Alley. Harry had been prepared for this. Griphook had described it. He'd studied maps. He'd read about the shops, the layout, the history. None of it had prepared him for the reality. The alley was alive. It twisted and curved ahead of him, lined with shops that leaned and jutted at angles that defied both architecture and gravity. Windows displayed cauldrons, broomsticks, owls, robes, books with moving covers, telescopes, cages of creatures Harry had no names for. Witches and wizards in robes of every color moved through the rain under enchanted umbrellas that hovered without being held. A shop called Gamble and Japes was setting off small fireworks from its doorway that spelled out sale in sparks. A woman was selling roasted chestnuts from a cart, except the chestnuts were bright purple and crackled with tiny lightning bolts. Harry took it in. He let himself have 3 seconds of wide-eyed wonder, 3 seconds of being a kid seeing something impossible for the first time, and then he put it away and focused. Gringotts first, he said. They walked. The alley was busy despite the rain, and people noticed them. The goblin escort was impossible to miss entirely, even with the cloaks. Whispers followed them like a wake behind a boat. Harry caught fragments, goblins, in the alley, armed, look at is that a child with them? Gringotts' Wizarding Bank stood at the far end of Diagon Alley like a statement. It was white marble, multi-storied, with bronze doors that were taller than any door had a right to be and a pair of goblin guards in gold and scarlet uniforms flanking the entrance. The building didn't lean or twist like the shops around it. It stood straight. It stood permanent. It said, without words, we were here before you, we will be here after you, and your gold is safer with us than with you. The guards saw Griphook and snapped to attention. Griphook gave them a curt nod. Ironclaw exchanged a rapid burst of goblin language with the one on the right. The bronze doors swung open. The interior of Gringotts was vast. A long marble hall, lined with high counters, behind which goblins sat on tall stools weighing coins, examining gemstones, writing in enormous ledgers with quills that moved faster than Harry could track. The ceiling was arched and painted with scenes that Harry assumed were historical, battles, treaties, goblins standing over fallen wizards, goblins forging things in fire, goblins with stacks of gold that reached the sky. The message was not subtle. Griphook led Harry to the far end of the hall, past the public counters, through a door marked with runes that glowed briefly as they passed through. Beyond was a corridor, still marble, but darker, quieter, and then another door, heavier, iron-bound, that opened into a room that was clearly designed for important meetings. Ragnarok was already there. He sat at the head of a long table of polished dark wood, wearing his burgundy robes, his staff leaning against his chair. Two other goblins flanked him, older, gray-haired, wearing the same kind of banker's suits as Griphook but with additional insignia that Harry didn't recognize. "Mr. Potter," Ragnarok said. "Welcome to Gringotts." Properly, this time. Harry sat at the place set for him, at Ragnarok's right hand, which Griphook had told him was a position of honor. Ironclaw took up station by the door, arms folded, back to the wall. "Before we proceed to the vaults," Ragnarok said, "there are formalities. Your identity must be confirmed by blood and magic for the bank's official records. This has not been done since your birth, when your parents registered you as heir." He gestured to one of the flanking goblins, who produced a shallow stone basin and a small silver knife. "A drop of blood on the verification stone. The stone will confirm your identity, your bloodline, and your current magical status." Harry didn't hesitate. He picked up the knife, light, perfectly balanced, sharp enough that he felt the cut after he'd already made it, and let a single drop of blood fall into the basin. The stone blazed. Not just light, information. Golden text erupted from the surface, spiraling upward in the air above the basin like a helix, spinning and resolving into legible lines. Harry James Potter, born, July 31, 1980. Blood status, half-blood father, James Fremont Potter, deceased, mother, Lily Potter née Evans, deceased, head of house, Potter, by right of blood and magic, magical core, exceptional, class 1. Current status, active, unbound, recovering from external suppression. Hereditary titles, heir of the noble and most ancient. House of Potter. Vault access, full. The two flanking goblins stared at the floating text. One of them made a choked sound. "Class 1, he said. "Director, the boy's core registers as Class 1. "I can read, Bogrod," Ragnarok said mildly. "Class 1 hasn't been recorded in a living wizard since Dumbledore." "Yes. I'm aware." Harry looked at the spinning text. "What does Class 1 mean?" Griphook answered, his voice very carefully controlled. "The Goblin classification system for magical cores runs from Class 5, average, to Class 1, extraordinary. Class 1 indicates a magical core of such magnitude that it places the wizard in question among the most powerful magic users alive. There are, to our knowledge, 3 living Class 1 wizards, Albus Dumbledore, the Dark Lord Voldemort, if he still lives, and you." The room was very quiet. "I'm 11, Harry said. "Yes," Griphook said. "And your core was suppressed for a decade. What we're reading now is your potential after 5 days of recovery. Once you're fully recovered and trained," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ragnarok tapped the table once with a fingernail. "This information does not leave this room. Not the classification, not the specifics. The public record will show that Harry Potter verified his identity and accessed his vaults. Nothing more." He looked around the table. "Am I understood?" Every goblin in the room nodded. "Good. Now, the vaults." They went down. Gringotts' vaults were deep underground, accessed by a system of cart tracks that plunged through twisting stone tunnels at speeds that would have been terrifying if Harry hadn't spent years dodging Dudley's gang on foot and found his sense of danger permanently recalibrated. The cart hurtled through the darkness, taking turns that pressed Harry against the side, plunging down slopes that made his stomach float, passing underground waterfalls and stalactite forests and, at one point, what Harry was fairly certain was a sleeping dragon. "Security measure," Griphook said, noticing Harry's stare. "Ukrainian Iron Belly. She guards the high-security vaults. You keep a dragon underground." "We keep 17 dragons underground." The iron belly is the friendliest. The cart stopped at a vault marked 687. Griphook placed his hand on the door and it swung open, and Harry stepped inside and stopped breathing. Gold. Mountains of gold. Coins, galleons, Griphook said, the fat gold ones, piled in drifts that reached the ceiling of a cavern the size of the Dursleys' ground floor. Silver coins, sickles, cascaded between the gold-like streams between hills. Bronze nuts filled the gaps. And among the currency, objects, goblets, chains, rings, loose gemstones, a suit of armor on a stand, stacks of gold bars stamped with the Gringotts seal. This is the trust vault, Griphook said. Established for your education and living expenses. It is, in the context of the Potter fortune, petty cash. This is petty cash. The family vault is 14 levels deeper and requires a blood key to access. We'll visit it another time, today is about essentials. Griphook produced a leather pouch. This is a self-replenishing money bag, linked to the vault. Whatever you spend will be automatically replaced up to a daily limit of 500 galleons. Sufficient for today's purposes. Harry took the pouch. It was warm in his hand. He looked out at the sea of gold and thought about the cupboard under the stairs, about bread crusts and Dudley's cast-offs, about £2,000 a month sitting in Vernon's bank account while Harry wore broken glasses and went to bed hungry. He closed his fist around the pouch. Let's go shopping. Back above ground, the rain had eased to a drizzle. Harry stepped out of Gringotts' bronze doors and into Diagon Alley with the money bag in his pocket and a focus that surprised even Griphook. Ollivanders first, Harry said. I need a wand before anything else. Agreed, Ironclaw said. That crater in the garden is getting bigger. I measured it this morning. They made their way down the alley. People parted for them, not because they recognized Harry, but because Ironclaw and her guards projected the kind of quiet menace that made crowds instinctively create space. Harry walked in the center of the formation, unhurried, taking in the storefronts with the systematic attention of someone who intended to know this place thoroughly. Ollivanders was a narrow shop near the bottom of the alley, with a single wand on a faded purple cushion in the window. The paint above the door read, Ollivanders, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. The shop looked ancient and underfunded, which Harry was beginning to understand was a wizard aesthetic choice rather than an economic reality. Griphook held the door. Ironclaw and I will wait outside. The guards will maintain perimeter. Wand selection is. He searched for the word. Personal. Intimate, Ironclaw said. Also, Ollivander gives me the creeps. Harry entered alone. A bell chimed above the door and the sound seemed to hang in the dusty air longer than it should have. The shop was tiny, just a single chair and a counter and, behind the counter, shelves. Thousands of shelves, floor to ceiling, wall to wall, stretching back into shadows that were deeper than the building's exterior should have allowed. Each shelf was packed with narrow boxes, and the boxes emanated a collective hum that was different from the word hum Harry had grown accustomed to, lighter, higher, like the resonance of glass. I wondered when I'd be seeing you, Mr. Potter. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Then a man materialized from between the shelves, old, white-haired, with pale, luminous eyes that were slightly too wide and had an unblinking quality that immediately explained Ironclaw's comment. He moved with a strange, floating grace, as though gravity was a suggestion he sometimes chose to follow. Mr. Ollivander, Harry said. You know my name. Good. Most people don't bother with it, they just come in and wave their arms about until something sparks. He drifted closer, those moonbright eyes fixed on Harry's face. It seems only yesterday your mother and father were in here buying their first wands. Your mother, willow, 10¼ inches, swishy. Wonderful for charm work. Your father, mahogany, 11 inches, pliable. Excellent for transfiguration. He stopped in front of Harry and his gaze traveled to the scar. And I'm sorry to say I sold the wand that did that, he murmured. 13.5 inches. You. Very powerful. If I'd known what it would do in the world. He trailed off, then blinked, and the dreamy quality snapped into brisk focus. Well. Let's find yours, shall we? Which is your wand arm? Right. A tape measure leaped from the counter and began measuring Harry, the length of his arm, the span of his fingers, the distance between his eyes, the circumference of his head, measurements that Harry was fairly certain had nothing to do with wand fitting and everything to do with Ollivander's personal curiosity. While it measured, Ollivander disappeared into the shelves and returned with an armful of boxes. Try this. Beechwood and dragon heartstring. 9 inches. Nice and flexible. Harry took it and waved it. Nothing happened. No, no. Let's see, maple and phoenix feather. 7 inches. Quite whippy. Harry barely touched it before Ollivander snatched it back. No. Definitely not. Here, ebony and unicorn hair, 8.5 inches, springy. Nothing. Box after box, wand after wand. Ollivander didn't seem discouraged. If anything, he grew more animated with each failure, pulling increasingly obscure boxes from increasingly remote shelves, muttering to himself in a way that oscillated between brilliant and unhinged. Tricky customer. Very tricky. Not to worry, the wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter, and sometimes the choosing takes time. He stopped. He was standing in front of a shelf near the back of the shop, one hand raised, not reaching for a box but hovering over one. His expression had changed. The animation drained out of it, replaced by something quieter. Reverence, maybe. Or trepidation. I wonder, he said softly. Yes, why not, unusual, but then, he pulled the box from the shelf and brought it to the counter and opened it. Inside, resting on aged velvet, was a wand. Dark wood, slightly longer than the others, with a subtle grain that caught the dusty light. Holly and phoenix feather, Ollivander said. 11 inches. Nice and supple. Harry picked it up. The world changed. It wasn't dramatic the way the ward activation at Privet Drive had been dramatic. There was no golden light, no house-shaking groan. It was quieter than that. Deeper. It was the feeling of a circuit completing, of a key finding its lock, of a voice answering a call that had been echoing in the dark for years. Warmth flooded up Harry's arm from his fingers to his shoulder to his chest, and his magical core, expanding, recovering, already powerful and getting more so every day, surged toward the wand like a river finding its channel. Sparks erupted from the wand's tip. Red and gold, bright as fireworks, spinning in the dusty air of the shop. The boxes on the shelves rattled. The window hummed. And Harry felt, for the first time in his life, whole. As if a part of him he hadn't known was missing had just snapped into place. Ollivander was staring. Not at the sparks. At Harry. Curious, he whispered. Very curious. What is? I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Potter. Every one. The phoenix whose tail feather resides in your wand gave another feather, just one other. It is very curious indeed that you should be destined for this wand, when its brother gave you that scar. The sparks died. The shop was silent. My wand is the brother of Voldemort's wand, Harry said. Ollivander flinched at the name, a full-body flinch, the kind Harry recognized from years of practice. We do not speak. I do, Harry said. Not challenging. Just factual. Voldemort. His wand and mine share a core. Ollivander looked at him for a long, strange moment. Yes, he said. They do. I think we must expect great things from you, Mr. Potter. After all, he who must, he caught himself. After all, Voldemort did great things. Terrible, yes. But great. Harry paid for the wand, 7 galleons, and left the shop holding it. It was warm in his hand, alive, a conduit that made his magic feel focused and directed rather than wild and diffuse. He could feel it humming at the same frequency as his core, two instruments tuned to the same note. Griphook was waiting. His eyes went to the wand immediately. "Holly and Phoenix Feather," he said. "I can feel the resonance from here. That's a powerful match. It's the brother wand to Voldemort's." Griphook went very still. Ironclaw's hand dropped to her sword hilt reflexively. "Explain," Griphook said. Harry explained. Griphook listened with the focused intensity of a banker who has just discovered an anomaly in an account, and when Harry finished, Griphook pulled out his notebook and wrote rapidly. "The twin core connection has implications," he said. "Historically, brother wands cannot be forced to duel each other directly, they'll produce a phenomenon called priori incantatum instead. This is both a vulnerability and a weapon, depending on the circumstances." He looked up. "The director will want to know about this immediately. I'll send word tonight." "What are the implications?" Harry asked. "If Voldemort returns, when, and if he confronts you directly, your wands will recognize each other. What happens after that depends on the strength of the wielders." Griphook pocketed his notebook. "You should know that among goblins, twin core connections are considered deeply significant. The goblin word for it translates roughly as fate-bound. Two halves of the same fire. I didn't choose this. Fate rarely asks permission. The question is what you do with it." Griphook gestured down the alley. "Madame Malkin's next. You need robes." They moved through Diagon Alley with purpose. Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions was a pleasant shop staffed by a plump witch who fussed over Harry with pins and tape and swathes of black fabric while a second customer stood on the next fitting stool, a boy Harry's age, pale and blonde and sharp-featured, who radiated the kind of casual superiority that Harry associated with people who had never been told no. "Hogwarts too?" the boy said, looking Harry over with undisguised evaluation. "Yes. Know what house you'll be in yet?" "I know I'll be in Slytherin, all our family have been." "Imagine being in Hufflepuff." "I think I'd leave, wouldn't you?" "I don't know enough about the houses to have an opinion yet," Harry said. The boy blinked. This was apparently not the expected response. "I'm Malfoy. Draco Malfoy." Malfoy. The name hit Harry's mental filing system and cross-referenced instantly. Lucius Malfoy, Death Eater, Wizengamot member, heavily leveraged. Draco, the son. Harry Potter. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Draco's entire bearing shifted, his eyes widened, his posture straightened, and something hungry flashed across his face before he smoothed it into a practiced casualness that was impressive for an 11-year-old. Harry Potter. Really? His eyes darted to the scar. "Father's told me all about you. Said you'd be starting Hogwarts this year." He said, "Well." He glanced toward the shop window, where Ironclaw was visible on the pavement outside, arms folded. "Are those goblins with you?" "They are." "Why?" "Business," Harry said. Draco waited for more. Harry gave him nothing. The silence stretched, and Draco rushed to fill it, a telling habit that Harry noted and filed. "My father's in the alley today too. At Borgin and Burke's, that's a shop in Nocturne Alley, they sell all sorts of interesting, well. He's getting some things appraised." Draco was studying Harry with an intensity that went beyond childish curiosity. He was assessing. "You know, my father could be very useful to you, Potter. The right connections matter, especially for someone in your position." "My position?" "Famous. Orphaned. New to the wizarding world." Draco said it without cruelty, as a statement of fact, the way a chess player describes the positions on a board. "You'll need allies. People who know how things work." "My family, your family served Voldemort," Harry said. The name dropped between them like a stone into a still pond. Draco went white. The fitting which dropped her pins. Even the enchanted tape measure recoiled. "My father was under the imperious curse," Draco said, and the rehearsed quality of the statement was so obvious that Harry almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Of course he was," Harry said mildly. "I'm sure it was very traumatic." Draco stared at him. Harry could see the gears turning. This was not the Harry Potter that Draco had been prepped to meet. Not a wide-eyed, grateful orphan who would swoon at the offer of pure-blood friendship. Something recalculated behind those gray eyes. "You're not what I expected," Draco said. "Most people aren't, once you get to know them." Madame Malkin declared Harry's fitting finished. He paid, collected his robes, and left Draco standing on the stool with an expression that suggested his world had just become slightly more complicated than his father had led him to believe. Outside, Ironclaw was grinning. "The Malfoy boy. You heard?" Goblin hearing. "I caught every word." She fell into step beside him. "He'll report back to Daddy tonight. By tomorrow morning, Lucius Malfoy will know that Harry Potter is not the malleable orphan he was hoping for." "Good," Harry said. "Let him wonder." They bought books at Flourish and Blots, the standard Hogwarts curriculum plus an additional stack Griphook selected, covering advanced magical theory, political history, and a goblin-authored text on ward magic that the shopkeeper eyed with suspicion but sold without comment. They bought a cauldron, scales, files, a telescope, and basic potion ingredients at a shop that smelled like a forest had been distilled and bottled. They bought parchment and quills at Scribulus, where Harry also picked up a set of self-inking pens that Griphook described as the only sensible writing instrument wizards have ever produced. At Elop's Owl Emporium, Harry stopped. "I know you said owls are a security risk," he told Griphook. "But I need a way to send personal mail. Not everything has to go through goblin channels." Griphook considered this. An owl for personal correspondence is acceptable, provided that sensitive information is never sent by owl post. For anything related to your finances, your political affairs, or your security, you use the communication mirror. Harry entered the shop. It was dim and full of rustling, hooting, and the soft percussion of feathered bodies shifting on perches. Owls of every size and species regarded him from high shelves: barn owls, tawny owls, great horned owls, tiny scops owls no bigger than his fist. A snowy owl at the back of the shop turned her head and fixed him with amber eyes. Harry walked toward her. She didn't look away. She didn't ruffle or puff up or do any of the things the other owls were doing. She just watched him approach with a regal, unhurried patience, and when he reached her perch and raised his hand, she leaned forward and butted her head against his fingers with a low, thrumming hoot. "She likes you," the shopkeeper said. "She doesn't like most people." Bit her last 3. Harry stroked the feathers on her chest. They were impossibly soft, white as fresh snow. "How much?" 15 galleons. "I'll take her." He carried her out of the shop in a cage, though cage felt wrong for something this magnificent. She rode it with an air of tolerating the indignity. "I'll name you Hedwig," Harry said, the name surfacing from somewhere in his reading, a medieval saint, a figure of wisdom and independence. The owl hooted as if in approval. Ironclaw eyed the owl. "Pretty bird. Conspicuous, though. Snowy owls aren't exactly common in Surrey. She'll mostly be at Hogwarts. Right, Hedwig?" Hedwig ignored them both with perfect composure. They were halfway back up the alley, laden with packages that Griphook kept shrinking and depositing into his satchel with a tap of his finger, when the crowd ahead parted and a man stepped into their path. He was tall. That was the first thing. Tall and pale and aristocratic, with white blonde hair that fell past his shoulders and a walking cane topped with a silver snake's head that Harry immediately recognized as a wand sheath. He wore robes of dark green so fine they looked liquid, and his face was a version of Draco's 25 years older, the same sharp features, the same gray eyes, but colder. Harder. With a patina of cruelty that Draco hadn't quite grown into yet. Lucius Malfoy looked at Harry. Then at Griphook. Then at Ironclaw. Then back at Harry. "Mr. Potter," he said. His voice was silk over steel. "What a pleasure. I've been hoping to make your acquaintance." Ironclaw's hand was on her sword. The guards had shifted, subtle movements, tightening the formation. Harry felt the change in the air the way he felt weather changes, a pressure drop that preceded a storm. "Mr. Malfoy," Harry said. "Your son mentioned you were in the alley today." "Draco." "Yes. He told me he'd met you at Madame Malkin's." Lucius's eyes swept over the goblin escort with an expression of amused disdain. Quite the entourage for a shopping trip. One might think the bank was making a statement. "One might," Griphook said. "One would be correct." Lucius looked at Griphook the way a man looks at a piece of furniture that has spoken out of turn. "I wasn't addressing you, Goblin." The temperature in the alley dropped by several degrees. Ironclaw's sword cleared its scabbard by an inch, a soft, singing sound of metal on metal that was louder than any shout. "Mr. Malfoy," Harry said, and his voice was calm and pleasant and completely without warmth. "Griphook is my account manager and personal representative. When you speak to him, you speak for the House of Potter's ears. I suggest you adjust your tone." The alley had gone quiet around them. Shoppers had stopped. Faces appeared in windows. The whisper network of Diagon Alley was doing what it did best, conducting information at the speed of gossip. Lucius Malfoy was a man who had survived the First Wizarding War by being smarter, richer, and more politically agile than everyone around him. He hadn't stayed out of Azkaban by being slow. Harry watched the recalculation happen in real time, the slight widening of the eyes, the flicker of reassessment, the careful reconstruction of the smile. "Forgive me," Lucius said smoothly. "No offense was intended. I merely wish to welcome you to our world, Mr. Potter. Your parents, your father in particular, were people of great significance. It would be a shame if their son fell in with the wrong crowd." "Define wrong crowd," Harry said. Lucius's smile thinned. "The wizarding world can be divided, Mr. Potter. There are those who understand the importance of tradition, of magical heritage, of keeping our world strong. And there are those who would dilute it, open the doors to anyone and everyone, regardless of blood or worth. Your father's family was one of the oldest in Britain. Surely you understand the value of that legacy." "I understand that my mother was Muggle-born," Harry said. "And that she was, by all accounts, the most brilliant witch of her generation. So I'm not sure what diluting means in this context. Can you clarify?" Lucius's smile vanished entirely. It was replaced by something flat and cold, the expression of a man who has just discovered that the piece he assumed was a pawn is, in fact, a knight. "You are remarkably well informed for someone who has only just entered our world. I have good advisors." Harry paused, then added, lightly, "How are your accounts at Gringotts, Mr. Malfoy? I understand you're quite leveraged." It was a guess. A calculated one, based on what Griphook had told him, and he couldn't be certain it would land. But the way Lucius Malfoy's face tightened, just a fraction, just for a second, told Harry everything he needed to know. The debt was real. The leverage was real. And Harry had just let Lucius know that he knew. "Enjoy your shopping, Mr. Potter," Lucius said. He turned and walked away. His cane struck the cobblestones with sharp, precise clicks that sounded like teeth snapping. The alley exhaled. Noise returned, chatter, laughter, the bustle of commerce. But the whispers were different now. Pointed. Fascinated. That, Griphook said, was extremely well done. Was it true? About his leverage? The Malfoy accounts carry significant debt obligations, yes. He's been renegotiating terms for 3 years. The fact that you knew, or appeared to know, will keep him awake tonight. Griphook looked almost gleeful. Director Ragnarok will be very pleased. I don't want to make an enemy of him, Harry said. Not yet. I just wanted him to know that I'm not someone he can manage. Oh, you accomplished that, Ironclaw said, sheathing the inch of sword she'd drawn. The entire alley accomplished that. You'll be in the profit tomorrow. They finished the shopping and returned to Gringotts. The carriage was waiting in its dimensional fold behind the bank, or however the spatial compression worked, but Griphook led Harry back into the marble hall first. There's someone here to see you, he said. She's been waiting for an hour. Who? Minerva McGonagall. She was in a private meeting room off the main hall. She stood when Harry entered, a tall, severe-looking woman in emerald robes, with her hair pulled back in a tight bun and spectacles perched on a nose that looked like it had been designed for looking down. Her expression was controlled, but her eyes were red-rimmed. Mr. Potter, she said. Her voice was crisp, Scottish, and slightly unsteady. My name is Minerva McGonagall. I'm the deputy headmistress of Hogwarts and your mother's former head of house. She stopped. Gathered herself. I owe you an apology. Harry sat down. For what, specifically? For not doing more. McGonagall remained standing, and Harry realized after a moment that it was because she didn't trust herself to sit. Her hands were clasped in front of her, white-knuckled. I was there the night Albus left you with the Dursleys. I watched that house for an entire day beforehand. I told him they were the worst sort of muggles. I told him you shouldn't be left there. And her jaw tightened. He assured me it was necessary. The blood wards. Your mother's sacrifice. The only way to keep you safe. And you believed him. I did. I trusted him. As I've trusted him for 40 years. Something cracked in her voice. When your goblin, Ironclaw, told me what had been happening in that house, I went to Albus. I demanded the truth. He gave me explanations. Rationalizations. The greater good. She said the last two words like they tasted of something rotten. I asked him about the stipend. About the cupboard. He said he'd been monitoring the situation. That you were safe, if not comfortable. That discomfort was a small price for what? McGonagall finally sat down. For keeping you humble. Those were his words. He said that growing up with wealth and adulation would have made you arrogant. That you needed to understand ordinary life. Ordinary hardship. She met his eyes. As if what happened to you in that house was ordinary. The room was very quiet. Harry could hear Griphook breathing beside him, and the distant sound of Gringotts' machinery deep below. Professor McGonagall. What do you want? I want to help. I don't know how yet. I don't know what form it takes. But I am the deputy headmistress of the school you will attend in September, and I am telling you now, clearly and on the record, she glanced at Griphook, who was writing in his notebook, that I will not allow Albus Dumbledore to use his position to manipulate, control, or disadvantage you. Not again. Not while I draw breath. Harry studied her. He was 10, nearly 11, and he was sitting in a goblin bank evaluating the sincerity of a woman 4 times his age, and the strangest part was that it didn't feel strange. It felt like what his life was now. I believe you, he said. But I'll need more than words. When I'm at Hogwarts, I'll need someone inside the staff who'll tell me the truth. Not Dumbledore's truth. The actual truth. About what's happening, what's being planned, what's being said about me. Can you do that? McGonagall's eyes widened slightly. Then narrowed. You're asking me to spy on my employer. I'm asking you to protect a student. Isn't that your job? She stared at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression, surprise, respect, and a fierce kind of recognition. Your mother, she said. She had the same way of cutting through nonsense. Made me feel like I was the student and she was the professor. She straightened in her chair. Yes, Mr. Potter. I can do that. Thank you, Professor. Harry stood. I'll see you on September 1st. He left her in the meeting room. In the corridor outside, Griphook closed his notebook and looked at Harry with an expression that had evolved from professional respect into something more complicated. You just recruited the deputy headmistress of Hogwarts as an intelligence asset, Griphook said. You're 10 years old. Almost 11. Griphook shook his head slowly, but he was smiling. They returned to the carriage. The ride back to Surrey was quiet. Ironclaw dozed against the wall with the boneless ease of a soldier who could sleep anywhere, and the guard sat motionless, and Griphook worked through his notebook, making annotations and cross-references. Harry sat by the window and watched London blur into suburbs and suburbs blur into the manicured nowhere of Little Whinging. In his pocket, his wand hummed. In his lap, Hedwig slept in her cage. In his mind, the pieces of a very large puzzle were beginning to arrange themselves. He had gold. He had allies. He had a wand that was the twin of his parents' murderers. He had the loyalty of the Goblin Nation and the quiet support of a Hogwarts professor and the attention of every political player in magical Britain. He was famous, he was powerful, and he was just getting started. The carriage stopped outside number 4. Harry stepped out into the evening air. The rain had stopped, and the sky was streaked with orange and purple, the kind of English summer sunset that looked like watercolors bleeding together. The wards welcomed him as he crossed the boundary, warm and humming, and the house settled around him as he stepped through the front door. Vernon was in the kitchen, cooking dinner. Petunia was ironing in the sitting room. Dudley was at the small table by the window, doing something that surprised Harry enough to make him stop and look again. Reading. Dudley was reading. Not a comic book, an actual book, something with a green cover that Harry couldn't identify from the doorway. It was on the shelf, Dudley said without looking up. The new shelf. In the hallway. It just. I don't know. I wanted to read it. Harry looked at the shelf. It was the one the goblin carpenters had built where the cupboard used to be, the enchanted wood that responded to the house's owner. The books on it were from the Potter Vault, history, fiction, introductory magic texts. Goblin treated wood with a rudimentary awareness, Griphook had said. The house was trying to educate his cousin. Harry left Dudley reading and went upstairs. He put Hedwig on the desk, opened her cage, and she hopped out and took up residence on the wardrobe with the air of someone who had always lived there. He set his wand on the bedside table and stood at the window and looked out at Privet Drive in the fading light. Tomorrow was July 30th. The day after that, he'd turn 11. Somewhere, a stone called the Philosopher's Stone was being moved or hidden or protected. Griphook had mentioned it in passing, a fragment of intelligence the goblins were tracking. Somewhere, Voldemort existed in whatever diminished form he'd been reduced to, plotting his return. Somewhere, Dumbledore was sitting in an office in a castle in Scotland, recalculating his plans for a boy who had stopped being a pawn. The communication mirror Ragnarok had given him sat on the desk, a hand-sized disc of polished silver that activated at a touch and a spoken name. Harry picked it up. Director Ragnarok. The surface rippled. Ragnarok's face appeared, sharp and clear. Mr. Potter. I hear you had an eventful day. Griphook told you about the wand. He did. And about Malfoy. And about McGonagall. The old goblin's expression was unreadable. You've been in the wizarding world for less than 12 hours and you've already destabilized a political rival, secured an intelligence source at Hogwarts, and bonded with a wand that shares a core with the darkest wizard in a century. That's quite a morning. It felt like a lot more than a morning. It'll get faster. Everything does, once you're moving. Ragnarok paused. I wanted to tell you something. About tomorrow. About the meeting. What meeting? Dumbledore has requested a formal audience. At Gringotts. With you, with me, and with, his words, all relevant parties. He's invoking his position as headmaster and his previous role as your magical guardian. Ragnar's lip curled. Previous being the operative word. Harry's grip on the mirror tightened. When? Tomorrow afternoon. 2 o'clock. He'll bring at least one ally, I expect Alastair Moody, the retired Auror who ran security for the Order. Possibly others. He's making a show of it. Then we make a bigger show. Ragnar's eyes glittered. What did you have in mind? Harry thought about it. He thought about Dumbledore, brilliant, powerful, certain he was right. He thought about the greater good. He thought about the cupboard. He thought about Class 1 magical cores and brother wands and blood wards that had siphoned a child's magic for a decade. He thought about what Griphook had told him about leverage, that in Goblin philosophy, the strongest position was the one where your opponent didn't know the full extent of your resources. I want the financial records, Harry said. Everything. The stipend payments, the guardianship documents, the property filings, everything Dumbledore did with Potter assets without authorization. I want it organized, documented, and ready to present. Already done. I want McGonagall there. Not as Dumbledore's ally, as an independent witness. She told me she'd tell the truth. Let's see if she meant it. I can arrange that. And I want Dumbledore to know, before he walks through the door, that I've seen the cupboard. That I've read the files. That I know about the monitoring charms and the stipend and the blood ward siphoning my magic. I don't want him to have the option of pretending it was all an innocent mistake. I want him to walk in knowing that every card is on the table. Ragnar was quiet for a moment. Then he said, your grandmother Euphemia, she was like this. Still water, deep current. You could never tell what she was thinking until it was too late. He adjusted his grip on whatever he was holding on his end of the mirror. I'll send Dumbledore the terms tonight. 2 o'clock. Full documentation on the table. McGonagall as witness. No games. No games, Harry agreed. Just the truth. That's the most dangerous weapon there is. Ragnar smiled, the full goblin smile, all teeth and centuries of outlasting everyone who'd ever underestimated him. Happy early birthday, Mr. Potter. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, you go to war. The mirror went dark. Harry set it down. Outside, the last of the sunset faded. The streetlights on Privet Drive clicked on, one by one, casting pools of orange light on the pavement. Normal lights on a normal street, doing what they'd done every evening for decades, oblivious. Harry got into bed. Hedwig hooted softly from the wardrobe. The wards hummed. The house breathed. Tomorrow, Albus Dumbledore. Harry closed his eyes and sleep came fast, the deep, dark, dreamless sleep of someone who knows exactly who they are and exactly what they're going to do about it. Chapter 4, The Train, the Hat, and the first shots fired. The meeting with Dumbledore had gone exactly as Ragnar predicted, and nothing like Dumbledore expected. Harry had replayed it in his mind 100 times during the 5 weeks between his birthday and September 1st, turning it over like a stone in his pocket, examining the facets. The old wizard had arrived at Gringotts in robes of midnight blue spangled with silver stars, his long white beard tucked into his belt, his half-moon spectacles perched on a nose that had been broken at least twice, and his eyes, those famous blue eyes, twinkling with the warmth and wisdom of a man who had spent a century being the smartest person in every room he entered. He'd brought Moody. The retired Auror was exactly as Griphook had described, scarred, paranoid, with a magical eye that swiveled independently of his real one and a wooden leg that clunked against the marble floor of Gringotts like a metronome. He'd also brought a woman Harry didn't recognize, short, stout, with pink hair and an eager expression, who turned out to be a junior Auror named Tonks, brought along presumably as a show of ministry connection. They'd sat across from Harry, Ragnar, Griphook, and a goblin legal team of 3. McGonagall had taken a seat at the side of the table, technically neutral, her face carved from Scottish granite. Dumbledore had opened with warmth. Harry, my dear boy. How wonderful to see you looking so well. I must say, I've been terribly worried, Director Ragnarok, Harry had said, not coldly but without the softness Dumbledore was clearly expecting. Would you present the documentation? And Ragnarok had. Methodically, precisely, without raising his voice. The property records showing number 4 as Potter Land. The financial statements showing 117 months of stipend payments collected and never spent on Harry. The ward analysis showing the blood ward parasitically drawing on Harry's magical core. The guardianship documents Dumbledore had filed with the Ministry without Goblin authorization. The monitoring charm logs showing that Dumbledore had received regular reports on Harry's living conditions, including data that should have flagged the cupboard, the malnutrition, the physical evidence of neglect, and had not intervened. Each document was placed on the table with the soft precision of a card being played. Each one landed on Dumbledore's expression like a stone thrown into a still pond, ripples he couldn't suppress, no matter how hard he tried. The twinkle in his eyes had died somewhere around the third document. There are explanations for all of this, Dumbledore had said, when Ragnarok finished. I'm sure there are, Harry had replied. I've heard some of them already. The blood wards. My mother's sacrifice. The greater good. Keeping me humble. He'd looked directly at Dumbledore. I lived in a cupboard under the stairs for 10 years, Professor. I was starved. I was hit. I wore my cousin's old clothes while the money you arranged for my care bought him a second bedroom full of toys. I'd like a better explanation than the greater good. The silence that followed had been the most expensive thing in that room, and the room contained several million galleons worth of goblin legal expertise. Dumbledore had tried. Harry would give him that. He'd spoken about Voldemort, about the prophecy, and that was how Harry first heard about the prophecy, not from some carefully staged revelation in a headmaster's office years down the line, but across a conference table at Gringotts with a legal team taking notes. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. Dumbledore had explained that the blood wards were the only thing keeping Harry safe from Voldemort's remaining followers, that the sacrifice required shared blood, that Petunia was the only option. The blood wards have been replaced, Ragnarok had said. By goblin ward work that is superior in every measurable way. The boy is safer now than he has ever been. Your argument is moot. Dumbledore had tried a different angle. Hogwarts. Harry's education. The need for guidance, for mentorship, for someone who understood the full scope of the threat Voldemort posed. I intend to attend Hogwarts, Harry had said. I intend to learn everything it has to teach me. But you are the headmaster of a school, Professor Dumbledore. You are not my guardian. You are not my advisor. You do not control my finances, my living arrangements, or my political affairs. If you want to be a part of my life, you can earn it, through honesty, through transparency, and through treating me as a person rather than a piece on a chessboard. That was when McGonagall had spoken. Her voice had been quiet and devastatingly clear. He's right, Albus. And if you can't see that, you're not the man I thought you were. Dumbledore had looked at her. And for the first time, Harry had seen something behind those blue eyes that wasn't warmth or wisdom or calculation. It was pain. Real, genuine pain, the kind that comes from realizing you've been wrong about something fundamental, or from being seen clearly by someone whose opinion you value. I have made mistakes, Dumbledore had said. Grave ones. I see that now. Seeing isn't fixing, Harry had replied. You can fix them. Start with the Wisengamot seat. I want it back. My proxy, not yours. Griphook will handle the administrative transfer. Dumbledore had looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok had looked back with the patience of a mountain. Very well, Dumbledore had said. And that had been that. Not a victory, not really. Dumbledore was too powerful and too deeply embedded in the fabric of magical Britain to be defeated by a single meeting. But it was a boundary. A line drawn in goblin ink on goblin parchment, witnessed by a deputy headmistress and notarized by the bank. Harry Potter was not Dumbledore's to direct. Whatever came next, it would happen on Harry's terms. That had been 5 weeks ago. Harry had spent every day since then preparing. Now it was September 1st, and the rain was back. Harry stood in the master bedroom of number 4, Privet Drive, checking his trunk for the 3rd time. It was a goblin-made trunk, compact on the outside, cavernous on the inside, with 7 compartments that could be accessed by tapping different sequences on the lock. Compartment 1 held his school supplies, books, robes, cauldron, potions kit, telescope, parchment, quills. Compartment 2 held his personal library, the books Griphook had provided, plus a dozen more from the Potter vault. Compartment 3 held the communication mirror, a set of goblin-forged writing instruments, and a leather folio containing copies of every document from the Dumbledore meeting. Compartments 4 through 7 were empty, waiting. His wand was in a holster on his right forearm, another goblin product, fitted to his arm, invisible under his sleeve. Ironclaw had insisted. "Never put your wand in your pocket," she'd said. "Never put it in your trunk. Never let it be more than a wrist flick from your hand. Goblins sleep with their weapons. Wizards should do the same." Hedwig was in her cage on the desk, preening her feathers with the self-absorbed dignity of a creature that knew exactly how beautiful it was. She'd grown accustomed to the house in the last month. She came and went through the bedroom window, hunting at night, returning at dawn with the silent efficiency of a feathered missile. Harry looked around the room. The photograph of his parents on the desk. The Muggle photograph of Lily and Petunia beside it. The books on the shelf. The wardrobe full of clothes that fit him. The bed he'd slept in for 5 weeks, the best 5 weeks of his life. He'd be back for Christmas. The wards would hold. The goblins would maintain their presence. The Dursleys would continue their service, Vernon grimly, Petunia quietly, Dudley with a confused willingness that had surprised everyone. Harry picked up the trunk and went downstairs. The hallway was different now. The bookshelf where the cupboard had been was fully stocked, and the wood glowed with a faint warmth that responded to Harry's proximity. The walls had been repainted. The photographs had been rearranged. Petunia's old family photos were still there, but alongside them now were magical photographs from the Potter vault, James and Lily at their wedding, Fleamont and Euphemia at some formal event, a baby Harry being held by a man with long black hair and a reckless grin whom Griphook had identified as Sirius Black, Harry's godfather. Currently in Azkaban. A story for another day, Ragnarok had said. Vernon was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters. He moved differently now, not with the stiff, mechanical resistance of the first week, but with the dulled routine of someone who had accepted, if not embraced, his reality. He didn't look at Harry as he passed. He rarely did. Petunia was by the front door, holding a brown paper bag. "Sandwiches," she said. "For the train. I didn't know if they'd have food, so she stopped. Her hands, holding the bag, were trembling. "It's a long journey." Harry took the bag. "Thank you, Aunt Petunia." She nodded. Her eyes were dry, but there was something in them that Harry was learning to read, something that might, in another life, in a woman who'd made different choices, have been love. "Your mother used to leave on September 1st, Petunia said. "Every year. She'd stand right where you're standing, with her trunk and her owl. She had a tawny, not a snowy, and our parents would drive her to King's Cross and I'd sit in the back of the car and pretend I didn't care." Her voice was barely audible. "I cared." "I know," Harry said. He stepped through the front door. The carriage was waiting. Griphook was already inside, Ironclaw was on the pavement, conferring with the house guard detail in Rapid Goblin. She turned when Harry came out. "Ready?" "Ready. I'll be at the station. Once you're on the train, my jurisdiction ends. Hogwarts wards take over when the express crosses the boundary into school territory. But I'll have scouts along the route, and a permanent observation post in Hogsmeade. If anything happens at school that threatens your safety, the mirror is your first call. Understood. Ironclaw looked at him. She was not, by nature or training, a sentimental creature. But something in her expression softened, just a degree, just for a second. You've done well these past weeks, Potter. The training, the study, all of it. You're not the boy we found in the garden. I'm exactly the boy you found in the garden, Harry said. I'm just not hungry anymore. Ironclaw barked a laugh. Get on the train. Make trouble. Harry climbed into the carriage. It rolled away from Privet Drive, and Harry watched through the window as number 4, with its goblin guards and its humming wards and its complicated, broken family, grew small and vanished behind a curve in the road. King's Cross Station was a cathedral of noise and motion. The carriage deposited them in a quiet side street nearby, and Harry walked the rest of the way with Grip Hook at his side and 2 goblin guards trailing at a discreet distance. The trunk had been shrunk to the size of a matchbox and sat in his jacket pocket. Hedwig was under a glamour that made her cage appear to be a backpack, goblin enchantment, courtesy of Ironclaw's paranoid thoroughness. Platform 9 3/4, Grip Hook said, leading Harry through the main concourse. Between platforms 9 and 10. You walk through the barrier, it looks like a solid brick wall, but it's a permanent portal. Don't hesitate. Hesitation attracts attention. They approached the barrier. Muggles streamed past on either side, oblivious. Harry looked at the solid brick wall between platforms 9 and 10. It looked exactly like every other wall in the station. On your own from here, Grip Hook said. He stopped walking. The goblins couldn't go through, or rather, wouldn't. The platform beyond was wizarding space, and a goblin escort appearing there would create exactly the kind of political incident that Ragnarok wanted to orchestrate on his own terms, at a time of his choosing. Thank you, Grip Hook, Harry said. For everything. Grip Hook adjusted his suit jacket. I'll be available by mirror at any time. Day or night. Don't hesitate to use it. He paused. And Mr. Potter, yes. Enjoy school. You deserve to be a child occasionally. Don't let the politics consume everything. He said it stiffly, as if the sentiment was a foreign object he was handling with tongs, but his eyes were sincere. Harry smiled. I'll try. He turned and walked at the barrier. No hesitation. The brick rushed toward him, and then it wasn't brick, it was mist, it was nothing, and he was through. Platform 9 3/4 burst into existence around him. A scarlet steam engine, the Hogwarts Express, sat on the tracks belching white steam into the vaulted ceiling. The platform was packed, students in muggle clothes and wizard robes, parents fussing and hugging, owls hooting, cats yowling, trunks being loaded. A sign overhead read Hogwarts Express, 11 o'clock. It was 10:15. Harry unshrunk his trunk in a quiet corner, removed Hedwig's glamour, and made his way along the platform toward the train. Heads turned. Some recognized him, the Scar, always the Scar, and he heard the whispers start up. He kept walking. He found a compartment near the middle of the train, empty, and hauled his trunk in and stowed it on the rack. Hedwig hooted from her cage, displeased with the jostling. Harry sat down by the window and watched the platform fill. Families everywhere. Mothers straightening collars, fathers lifting trunks, younger siblings pressing their faces against the windows of the train with desperate envy. A red-haired woman was surrounded by a small army of red-haired children, her voice carrying clear across the platform, Fred, I swear, if you've put another dung bomb in your sisters, George, don't think I can't see you, Ron, stand up straight, Percy, please set an example. Harry watched the red-haired family with an ache he didn't want to examine too closely. 5 children that he could count, plus the mother, all of them loud and messy and obviously, fundamentally together. The compartment door slid open. Anyone sitting here? Everywhere else is full. The boy was tall and gangly and red-haired, one of the army from the platform, clearly. He had a long nose, freckles, and a smudge of dirt on the side of his face. He was also looking at Harry with the careful, hopeful expression of someone who wanted to sit down but was prepared to be told no. "Go ahead," Harry said. The boy collapsed onto the opposite seat with visible relief. "Thanks. I'm Ron. Ron Weasley. Harry Potter." Ron's eyes went predictably wide. His gaze darted to the scar. "Are you really? I mean, sorry, that's probably, everyone asks, right? You're the first person on this train to ask, so technically no." Ron laughed. It was a good laugh, open, unguarded. "My brothers told me you'd be starting this year. Fred and George, they're third years, twins, they know everything about everyone. They said you'd probably be in Gryffindor. What house are you hoping for?" "Gryffindor. Whole family's been Gryffindor. I'll probably get expelled if I'm not." He pulled a battered sandwich from his pocket, looked at it with resignation, then looked at Harry's trunk and headwig and the quality of Harry's jacket and seemed to perform some internal calculation. "So is it true you've been living with Muggles?" "Until recently." "What's that like?" "It was bad. Then it got better." Harry pulled the brown paper bag from his pocket, Petunia sandwiches. He opened it. Ham and cheese, neatly cut, with a napkin. He offered one to Ron. "Trade you?" "I've never had a wizard sandwich." Ron looked at his own sad corned beef. "Trust me, you're not missing much. Mom makes these but she always forgets I hate corned beef." He took Harry's sandwich and handed over his own. "Fair warning, it's terrible." It was, in fact, terrible. Harry ate it anyway. The train lurched and began to move. The platform slid away, the red-haired woman waving, the younger sister running alongside the train until it outpaced her. London gave way to suburbs, suburbs to fields, fields to rolling countryside under a sky that was trying to decide between grey and blue. Ron talked. He talked the way water runs downhill, naturally, without effort, filling every available space. He talked about his family, 5 brothers, Bill and Charlie already graduated, Percy a prefect, Fred and George menaces, 1 sister, Ginny, a year below them, furious at being left behind. He talked about Hogwarts, the houses, the teachers, the ghosts, the moving staircases. He talked about Quidditch with the fevered devotion of a true believer, describing the rules and positions with a level of tactical detail that Harry filed away for future reference. Harry listened more than he spoke, which suited them both. When he did speak, he was careful, not evasive, but measured. He told Ron about the Dursleys in general terms without mentioning the Goblins. He expressed genuine ignorance about the wizarding world that was, by now, mostly performed. Griphook had educated him thoroughly, but there was value in being underestimated, and Ron's unfiltered commentary provided a perspective that no Goblin briefing could replicate. The view from the ground. The ordinary wizarding experience. The compartment door opened again around noon. A bushy-haired girl with large front teeth and an air of barely contained intellectual frenzy appeared in the doorway. "Has anyone seen a toad?" "A boy named Neville's lost one." "No," Ron said. "Sorry." The girl didn't leave. She was looking at them, at Harry, specifically, with the dawning recognition that Harry was learning to expect. But she didn't gasp or stammer. She walked in, sat down uninvited, and said, "I'm Hermione Granger. And you're Harry Potter. I know all about you, of course, I got a few extra books for background reading, and you're in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts and great wizarding events of the 20th century." "I'm in books," Harry said. "Several. You're quite famous." She said it the way she might say you have brown hair, as a fact, without particular reverence. "Is it true that you defeated you-know-who as a baby?" "Something happened when I was a baby. I don't remember it. I survived and he didn't. The rest is other people's interpretation." Hermione blinked. That's, actually a very good way of putting it. Most of the books just say you're a hero. Books are written by people, and people have agendas. Hermione looked at him like he'd said something she'd been thinking but had never heard anyone else articulate. That's exactly, yes. I've noticed that. Even the textbooks contradict each other in places. A History of Magic says the Goblin rebellions were unprovoked, but Unfogged mentions treaty violations by the Ministry that, Hermione, Ron said. Breathe. She went slightly pink. Sorry. I get excited about, well, everything, really. My parents are dentists. They're muggles. I didn't know anything about magic until I got my letter. I've been trying to learn as much as possible so I won't be behind. You won't be, Harry said. The fact that you've already noticed the textbooks contradict each other puts you ahead of most people who grew up in this world. Hermione's pink deepened, but she sat up straighter. What house do you think you'll be in? I've read about all of them. Gryffindor sounds the best, obviously, but Ravenclaw wouldn't be bad. Why does Gryffindor sound best? Harry asked. Well, Dumbledore was in Gryffindor. Dumbledore isn't the only metric for quality. Hermione opened her mouth, closed it, and then tilted her head. You're not what the books say you are. No, Harry agreed. I'm not. She stayed. She sat next to Ron and across from Harry and talked about the curriculum and the teachers and the castle, and somewhere in the middle of it, she went from being a stranger in a doorway to being someone in the compartment, and the ease of it surprised Harry. He'd never had friends. He'd never been in a position to make them, the Dursleys had ensured that. But here, on a train hurtling through the English countryside toward a castle full of magic, two people his own age were sitting with him and talking to him like a person, and it felt good. Simple and good and uncomplicated. The door slid open a third time. This time, the energy that preceded the newcomer was entirely different. Draco Malfoy stood in the doorway, flanked by two boys who were built like young gorillas. He'd changed into his Hogwarts robes already, eager, Harry thought, or strategic, and his blonde hair was slicked back in a way that mirrored his father's. So it's true, Draco said. Harry Potter's on the train. His eyes swept the compartment, Ron's shabby robes, Hermione's eager expression, the corned beef wrapper on the seat. I see you've already found yourself some company. Malfoy, Harry said. We met at Madame Malkin's. We did. I've been thinking about our conversation since then. Draco stepped into the compartment. The two gorillas positioned themselves in the doorway. I think we got off on the wrong foot, Potter. My father says it's important to make the right friends. His gaze flicked to Ron. Some families are better than others. I can help you with that. Ron's ears went red. Hermione tensed. Harry regarded Draco with the same calm, assessing look he'd used in Diagon Alley. Malfoy, I'm going to be direct with you, because I think you're smart enough to appreciate directness. I choose my own friends based on my own criteria. Not your father's. Not anyone's. My father, your father is a man I've met once, who tried to recruit me in a shopping district and left disappointed. If you want to talk to me as Draco. Not as Lucius Malfoy's son. I've had enough of people trying to use me for their own purposes. The compartment was very quiet. Ron was staring at Harry with open admiration. Hermione was watching with the focused attention of someone taking mental notes. The two gorillas in the doorway shifted uncertainly. Draco's face went through several rapid transformations. Anger, surprise, confusion, and underneath all of that, something that looked almost like relief. As if someone had just told him the rules of a game he'd been playing his whole life didn't actually apply here. I don't know how to do that, Draco said. It came out before he could stop it, unguarded, unpolished, real, and the second it was in the air he flinched and reconstructed his mask. I mean, I know what you mean, Harry said. Think about it. You know where to find me. Draco looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned on his heel and left, his gorillas lumbering after him. The compartment door slid shut. "What the bloody hell was that?" Ron said. "That," Harry said, "was an 11-year-old who's been told what to think his entire life, getting a chance to choose differently. He probably won't take it. But the door's open. He called me, well, he was about to. His family hates my family, his father hates your father. Those are different things. Or they can be." Harry looked at Ron steadily. "I grew up with people who hated me because they were told to. It's a pattern I'd rather break than repeat." Ron went quiet. Hermione was staring at Harry with an expression that had evolved from curiosity into something deeper. "You really aren't what the books say," she said softly. "Nobody is." The countryside darkened. The train rocked and swayed through the gathering dusk, and the compartment filled with the easy, unstructured conversation of children getting to know each other. They bought chocolate frogs and Bertie bought every flavor beans from a witch with a trolley. Ron explained the chocolate frog cards, collectible, featuring famous witches and wizards, and Harry's first frog card was Dumbledore. He looked at the serene, twinkling face on the card and said nothing, and put it in his pocket. They changed into their robes. Harry's were well-fitted and new, Ron's were second-hand, slightly too long, with a frayed hem. Harry noticed Ron noticing the difference and said, matter-of-factly, "I was wearing my cousin's hand-me-downs a month ago. Clothes don't mean anything." Ron's ears went red again, but he grinned. The train slowed. A voice echoed through the carriages, "We will be reaching Hogwarts in 5 minutes' time. Please leave your luggage on the train, it will be taken to the school separately." Harry touched the wand holster on his forearm. The holly wand hummed against his skin, warm and eager. Hogwarts. They stepped off the train into cool night air and a chorus of voices. A massive figure with a wild beard and beetle-black eyes was bellowing, "Furs years. Furs years over here," from the end of the platform, holding a lantern that cast shadows the size of houses. Harry recognized the description from Griphook's briefing, Rubius Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. Half-giant. One of Dumbledore's most loyal followers. Probably the one who had delivered Harry to the Dursleys as a baby. Harry studied him as they approached. Hagrid's face was nearly invisible behind the beard, but his eyes, small, dark, crinkled, were warm in a way that seemed genuine rather than performed. When those eyes found Harry, they widened, and something in the massive face crumpled with an emotion so raw it was almost indecent. "Harry," Hagrid said. Just the name. As if he'd been waiting 10 years to say it. "Mr. Hagrid," Harry said. "I've heard about you." "Just Hagrid. Everyone calls me Hagrid." He was blinking rapidly, his massive hands opening and closing at his sides. "Last time I saw ya, you were just a baby. I carried ya to, well." He stopped. The memory behind his eyes was heavy and dark and he shook it off visibly. "Look at ya. Ya look just like your dad. Got your mum's eyes, though." "So I'm told." Hagrid led the first years to a fleet of small boats on the edge of a black lake. They climbed in, 4 to a boat, and the boats moved by themselves, gliding across water so still it was a perfect mirror. Harry sat with Ron, Hermione, and a round-faced boy who introduced himself in a trembling voice as Neville Longbottom, still toadless. "Everyone look up," Hagrid called from the lead boat. They looked up. And there it was. Hogwarts. The castle rose from the far shore like something that had grown rather than been built, towers and turrets and battlements climbing into the night sky, every window lit with golden light, the whole structure reflected in the lake so perfectly that it seemed to float between two skies. It was enormous. It was ancient. It was alive in a way Harry could feel, the same ward awareness as Privet Drive, but magnified 1,000-fold, a vast intelligence embedded in stone and magic that had been watching over children for a millennium. Harry let himself feel it. The wonder, The awe, the childlike amazement that no amount of political preparation or goblin briefings could armor against. For 30 seconds, he was just a kid seeing a castle for the first time, and it was magnificent. Then the boats reached the shore and the 30 seconds were over and he was Harry Potter again, walking into a building where the headmaster had tried to control his life, where a prophecy hung over his head, where everyone knew his name for something he didn't remember, and where somewhere, in a turban, in a stutter, in a handshake that had made his scar scream, something dark was waiting. McGonagall met them in the entrance hall. She was exactly as Harry remembered from Gringotts, severe, straight-backed, with eyes that could cut glass. She gave the first years the standard welcome speech about the four houses, Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, and the house system, and the points, and the expectations. Her gaze found Harry exactly once, held for a fraction of a second, and moved on without any visible change in expression. Professional. Good. They filed into the great hall. Harry had read about it, had studied architectural drawings in one of Griphook's books, but the reality overwhelmed the preparation. The ceiling was enchanted to mirror the sky outside, tonight, a deep black velvet pricked with stars, and thousands of candles floated in the air above four long tables packed with students. At the far end, on a raised platform, the staff table stretched the width of the hall. Harry's eyes found Dumbledore immediately, center seat, blue robes tonight, the half-moon spectacles catching candlelight. The twinkle was in full operation. If Harry hadn't sat across from the man at Gringotts 5 weeks ago and watched that twinkle die, he might have found it reassuring. 2 seats to Dumbledore's left, a man with greasy black hair, a hooked nose, and an expression of such comprehensive contempt that it seemed to encompass not just the students filing in but the concept of education itself. Harry knew the face from Griphook's dossier. Severus Snape. Potions Master. Former Death Eater. Spy for Dumbledore. Had attended Hogwarts with Harry's parents. Had hated James Potter with a passion that, according to Goblin intelligence, had not dimmed with death. And further down the table, in his purple turban, smiling his nervous smile, Professor Quirrell. Harry's scar gave a small, warning throb. He noted the sensation, catalogued it, and turned his attention to the front of the hall, where McGonagall was placing a stool and a battered old hat. The sorting hat. Harry knew about it, Griphook had explained the process. The hat was sentient, a creation of the four founders, capable of reading minds and assessing character. It would be placed on his head and it would see everything, the cupboard, the goblins, the Class 1 Corps, the Brother Wand, the meeting with Dumbledore. Everything. He should have been nervous. He wasn't. The hat began to sing. It was a long song about the four houses, their virtues, their founders, their histories, delivered in a surprisingly good tenor for a piece of haberdashery. When it finished, the hall applauded and McGonagall unrolled a long scroll. When I call your name, you will sit on the stool and put on the hat. Abbott, Hannah. A girl with pigtails stumbled to the stool. The hat deliberated for a moment. Hufflepuff. The Hufflepuff table cheered. Names continued. Bones, Susan, Hufflepuff. Boot, Terry, Ravenclaw. Brocklehurst, Mandy, Ravenclaw. Brown, Lavender, Gryffindor. Granger, Hermione. Hermione practically sprinted to the stool. The hat took longer with her, nearly a minute, before shouting, Gryffindor. Hermione's face split into a grin of pure relief and she hurried to the Gryffindor table. Longbottom, Neville. The round-faced boy tripped on the way to the stool. The hat took even longer with him, 2 minutes, and Neville looked increasingly terrified until the hat shouted, Gryffindor, and he ran to the table still wearing the hat, and had to come back to give it to the next student. Malfoy, Draco. Draco walked to the stool with his chin up and his shoulders set. The hat barely touched his head. Slytherin. Draco went to the Slytherin table with a satisfied smirk, but as he sat down, Harry saw him glance across the hall. Their eyes met for a moment. Harry couldn't read the expression. Then Draco turned away. More names. Then, Potter, Harry. The great hall went silent. Not a gradual quieting, a sudden, total silence, as if someone had cast a muting charm over 400 people simultaneously. Then the whispers exploded. Potter? The Harry Potter? Where? Which one? The one going up now. See the scar. Harry walked to the stool. He didn't hurry and he didn't dawdle. He sat down and McGonagall placed the hat on his head and the brim fell past his eyes and the great hall disappeared, replaced by darkness and a voice. Well, 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 the Sorting Hat said. It spoke inside his head, a warm, ancient, slightly amused voice that resonated in a way that reminded Harry of Ragnarok. Harry Potter. I've been looking forward to you. Have you? Oh yes. Your parents were interesting sortings, your father was Gryffindor through and through, never a doubt. Your mother was trickier. Could have gone Ravenclaw easily. But she chose courage over cleverness, in the end. The hat paused. And you? Oh, you're the trickiest I've had in years. Why? Because you have everything. Courage, undeniably. You've faced things that would have broken most adults, and you're sitting here with a straight spine and a clear mind. Intelligence, very sharp, very organized, the way you process information is almost goblin in its efficiency, if you'll pardon the comparison. Loyalty, deep, though guarded, and growing. And ambition. The hat's voice shifted, grew more serious. You have ambition that would make Salazar himself take notice. Not for power. For control. You never want to be helpless again. You never want to be at someone's mercy. You want to master your own fate, and you will burn the world down before you let anyone cage you again. Harry said nothing. The hat was seeing everything, the cupboard, Ragnarok, the meeting with Dumbledore, the Class 1 Corps, the Brother Wand. He felt its attention moving through his memories like hands through water. Slytherin would make you great, the hat said. Truly great. The ambition is there. The cunning, oh, the cunning. The way you handled Malfoy. The way you recruited McGonagall. You'd thrive in Slytherin. And what would Slytherin do to me? What do you mean? I mean the perception. The politics. Voldemort was Slytherin. Every Death Eater who matters was Slytherin. If I go to Slytherin, the wizarding world labels me as dark before I've cast my first spell. Dumbledore gets ammunition. See, the boy can't be trusted, he needs my guidance. The political game gets harder, not easier. The hat was quiet for a long moment. That, it said, is the most Slytherin reasoning I've ever heard for not being sorted into Slytherin. I know where I need to be. Gryffindor. My parents' house. The house of the boy who lived. It's the strategic choice and the honest one. I am brave. I have been brave every single day of my life. I just happen to be other things as well. You know, the hat said, and there was something like wonder in its voice, in 1,000 years, I don't think anyone has ever argued their sorting like a diplomatic negotiation. Is it working? The hat laughed. It was a strange sensation, laughter inside your own skull, warm and echoing. Gryffindor, the hat roared, and the last word was spoken aloud, to the hall, and the hat was lifted from Harry's head and the world rushed back, light and noise and the Gryffindor table erupting in the loudest cheer of the evening, students standing and screaming, the Weasley twins chanting, "We got Potter. We got Potter," in unison. Harry walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down next to Hermione, who was clapping so hard her hands were red. Ron was watching from the unsorted crowd with barely concealed anxiety. When his name was called, Weasley, Ronald. The hat barely hesitated. Gryffindor. Ron practically ran to the table and collapsed into the seat on Harry's other side, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. Thank God, Ron said. Mum would have sent a howler. The sorting ended. Dumbledore stood and gave a brief, cheerful speech that included the words nitwit, blubber, oddment, and tweak, which Harry suspected was designed to make him seem eccentric and harmless. Food appeared on the tables, enormous quantities, roasts and pies and vegetables and gravy and things Harry had no names for, and the great hall descended into the happy chaos of 400 hungry students eating at once. Harry ate. He talked to Ron and Hermione and Neville and the other new Gryffindors, Dean Thomas, Seamus Finnegan, Lavender Brown, Parvati Patil. He answered questions about himself vaguely and redirected conversations toward others with a skill that Griphook would have approved of. He laughed at Fred and George's jokes. He felt, for the first time, the strange and powerful sensation of belonging somewhere, of being in a room full of people who wanted him there. He also watched the staff table, specifically Dumbledore, who watched him back with an expression of benign interest that didn't reach his eyes. Snape, whose gaze had found Harry during the feast and hadn't left, and whose expression combined loathing and something else, something older and more painful than simple dislike. Quirrell, who was turned away from Harry, talking to the teacher on his other side, but whose turban occasionally seemed to shift in a way that had nothing to do with the movement of his head. Harry's scar prickled. Faintly, distantly, like a radio signal from very far away. He noted it. He catalogued it. He ate his treacle tart. The first week at Hogwarts passed in a blur of staircases, classrooms, and information. Harry navigated it the way he navigated everything, systematically, observationally, with a quiet competence that his teachers noticed and his classmates either admired or resented. Charms was taught by Professor Flitwick, a tiny wizard who stood on a stack of books to see over his desk and squeaked with excitement when he reached Harry's name on the roll call. Harry liked him immediately. Flitwick was enthusiastic without being performative, and he taught with the precision of someone who genuinely understood his subject. Transfiguration was McGonagall's domain, and she was every bit as formidable in the classroom as she was in a Gringotts conference room. She turned her desk into a pig and back on the first day, then spent the rest of the lesson explaining exactly why none of them would be able to do that for several years. Harry appreciated the honesty. History of magic was taught by a ghost, Professor Binns, who had apparently died and simply continued lecturing without noticing. The class was stupefyingly boring. Harry used it to read his own books under the desk. Herbology, astronomy, defense against the dark arts, each class added pieces to the picture. Harry absorbed them all, matching what he learned against what Griphook had already taught him and finding that the Goblin education had, in many cases, been more thorough and more accurate than what Hogwarts offered. The history of magic textbook's account of the Goblin Wars was so biased that Harry had to physically restrain himself from correcting Binns's ghost, which would have been the first time a student had spoken in that class in approximately a decade. Defense against the dark arts was the exception. It should have been the most interesting class, and in a sense, it was, but not for the reasons Quirrell intended. The man was a disaster. He stuttered through every sentence, flinched at his own demonstrations, and smelled of garlic, which he claimed was to ward off a vampire he'd met in Albania. The classroom reeked of it. Harry sat in the front row. Ironclaw had told him never to give a potential threat his back, and watched Quirrell with the same patient, systematic attention he applied to everything. The stutter was inconsistent. It appeared and disappeared based on context rather than following any recognizable speech pattern. The nervousness was performative. Quirrell's hands shook when students were watching, but when he thought no one was looking, they were perfectly steady. And the turban. Harry couldn't explain what was wrong with the turban. It was just a feeling, a pressure, a wrongness, the same dark static he'd felt when he'd shaken Quirrell's hand in the leaky cauldron. His scar ached in every defense lesson. Never painfully. Just enough to remind him it was there. Thursday brought potions, and Snape. The dungeon classroom was cold, dark, and deliberately unwelcoming. Snape stood at the front in black robes, his arms folded, his gaze sweeping the entering students with the warmth of a glacier evaluating icebergs. When his eyes reached Harry, something happened in them, a flash, a fracture, immediately suppressed, and his upper lip curled. "Ah yes," Snape said, once the class was seated. Harry Potter. Our new celebrity. The Slytherins snickered. Draco Malfoy, seated across the aisle, looked satisfied in a way that suggested he'd been anticipating this. Harry said nothing. He sat with his hands folded on his desk and his expression neutral and waited. Snape launched into a speech about the subtle science and exact art of potion-making, delivered in a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. It was, Harry had to admit, a good speech. Then Snape turned to him. Potter. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Harry knew the answer. Griphook's potions primer had covered it. But he also knew what Snape was doing, testing, probing, trying to establish a dynamic of dominance in front of the class. If Harry answered correctly, Snape would find another question. And another. Until Harry got one wrong, and then the humiliation would begin. The draft of living death, Harry said. A powerful sleeping potion. Asphodel and wormwood are its primary components, though the brewing process requires precise clockwise stirring at regulated intervals to prevent the saprophyros bean juice from crystallizing. Snape's eyes narrowed. The addition of the brewing detail had been deliberate, it went beyond the textbook answer. It said, I know more than you're expecting. Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? Snape said, his voice dropping colder. The stomach of a goat. It's a calcified mass that acts as an antidote to most poisons. Goblins use a synthetic variant for field medicine that's more potent than the organic version. A muscle twitched in Snape's jaw. And what is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? They're the same plant. Also known as aconite. Used in the wolfsbane potion, which alleviates the symptoms of lycanthropy. The root is the most potent part, but the leaves are more commonly used because they're easier to dose accurately. The dungeon was silent. Every student was staring. Hermione looked like she might vibrate out of her seat with competitive tension. Snape stared at Harry for a long moment. Whatever he'd expected, ignorance, arrogance, his father's swagger, he wasn't getting it. Harry looked back at him, calm and patient, and waited. 5 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, and the words seemed to cause him physical pain. 4, adequate preparation. He turned away sharply and began writing instructions on the board. Harry caught Draco's expression across the aisle. It was complicated. Not the satisfied smirk from earlier. Something else. After class, Ron fell into step beside Harry in the corridor. Bloody hell. Where'd you learn all that? I had a good tutor this summer. Snape looked like he wanted to murder you. Snape wanted me to fail. There's a difference. Harry adjusted his bag on his shoulder. He's testing me because of my father. They hated each other at school. How do you know that? I did my research, Ron. When people are going to hate you, it helps to know why. Ron was quiet for a moment. You're kind of scary, mate. In a good way. But scary. Harry grinned. It was, Ron would tell people later, the first time he'd seen Harry grin properly, wide and real and slightly wild, and it transformed his face from the careful, controlled mask he usually wore into something younger and more alive. Good, Harry said. Scary is useful. That evening, Harry sat on his bed in the first-year boys' dormitory with the curtains drawn and the communication mirror in his hand. Director Ragnarok. The surface rippled. Ragnarok's face appeared, lit from below by what looked like forge light. Mr. Potter. Report. Harry told him everything. The sorting. The classes. Snape. Quirrell. The persistent ache in his scar during defense against the dark arts. Ragnarok listened without interrupting, his expression sharpening at the mention of Quirrell and the turban. The scar reaction is concerning, Ragnarok said. Griphook has been researching the nature of that scar since we first noted its anomalous properties. He believes it may be more than a curse wound. More how? He doesn't know yet. But the fact that it reacts to a specific individual, and specifically to a man who recently returned from Albania, where our intelligence suggests Voldemort's remnant was last detected, is not a coincidence. Harry felt the cold clarity settle over him. You think Voldemort is connected to Quirrell? I think something is. Whether it's Voldemort himself, a fragment, an influence, the data is insufficient. But the correlation between your Scar's activity and Quirrell's proximity is documented now. 3 occurrences. That's a pattern. What do I do? Watch. Record. Don't engage. If Quirrell is connected to Voldemort, confronting him prematurely would alert whatever power is behind him. You have time. Use it. Ragnarok paused. There is another matter. The 3rd floor corridor. Harry had noticed that, Dumbledore's announcement at the start of term feast. The 3rd floor corridor on the right-hand side was out of bounds to anyone who did not wish to die a very painful death. Delivered with a smile, as if a death threat was a charming eccentricity. Our intelligence indicates that Dumbledore has placed something in the school, Ragnarok said. An object of significant value, protected by a series of enchantments. We believe it is the Philosopher's Stone, an alchemical artifact created by Nicholas Flamel that produces the elixir of life. Why would Dumbledore hide a priceless artifact in a school full of children? That is the question, isn't it? Ragnarok's expression could have frozen lava. Our working theory is that it's a trap. Bait for whoever, or whatever, Voldemort has become. Dumbledore wants to draw him out. The school is the honey pot. And the students are collateral. Dumbledore would say they're protected. The enchantments guarding the stone are supposedly impenetrable. But the man who placed them is the same man who thought blood wards on a cupboard were adequate protection for a child. I question his definition of impenetrable. Harry absorbed this. I need to know what protections are in place. The specific enchantments. If something goes wrong, Griphook is working on it. We have sources within the school. Give us time. Ragnarok leaned closer to the mirror. And Mr. Potter, whatever Dumbledore is planning, remember, you are not his soldier. If the situation becomes dangerous, you contact us. Do not play hero. I won't. Good. Now get some sleep. You're 11. You need it. The mirror went dark. Harry lay back on his bed and stared at the canopy above him. Beyond the curtains, he could hear Ron snoring, Neville mumbling in his sleep, Dean's steady breathing. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. The sounds of a world that didn't know what was hiding in a turban 2 floors above them, or what was locked behind a door on the 3rd floor corridor, or what was gathering in the shadows beyond the edges of everything they understood. Harry closed his eyes. The wand on his forearm hummed. The wards of Hogwarts pressed against his consciousness like a vast, ancient heartbeat. He slept. But lightly. The weeks flowed. Harry fell into a rhythm, classes during the day, study in the evening, mirror calls with Ragnarok or Griphook every few nights. He learned magic with a speed that startled his teachers. In charms, he mastered the levitation charm on the first attempt, Wingardium Leviosa, and the feather didn't just float, it shot to the ceiling and stuck there, vibrating with excess energy. Flitwick had to climb his book stack to retrieve it. Remarkable control for a first attempt, Mr. Potter, Flitwick said, his squeaky voice higher than usual. Or rather, remarkable power. The control will come. In Transfiguration, Harry turned his match into a needle before McGonagall finished explaining the theory. She gave him a rare, small smile and awarded Gryffindor 15 points. In potions, Snape remained hostile, but Harry's consistent competence left him with nothing to exploit. Every question was answered correctly. Every potion was brewed precisely. Snape couldn't fault the work, and it infuriated him in a way that was almost, satisfying. The only class where Harry deliberately underperformed was Defense Against the Dark Arts. Not visibly, he answered questions, completed assignments, participated in demonstrations. But he held back. He used the minimum magic necessary. He wanted Quirrell to see a competent but unremarkable student, not a threat. Whatever was hiding in that turban, Harry wanted it comfortable. Complacent. Looking elsewhere. His scar ached in every lesson. He kept a log. Friendships grew. Ron was easy, loyal, funny, strategically brilliant at chess, emotionally transparent in a way that Harry found both refreshing and slightly alarming. Hermione was harder, her need to be the best at everything created friction, and her respect for authority sometimes clashed with Harry's deeply ingrained distrust of it. But she was brilliant and brave, and she cared fiercely about fairness, and those things mattered more than the friction. Neville was a surprise. Quiet, uncertain, seemingly the least remarkable member of their year, but Harry recognized something in him. The flinch. The hunched shoulders. The way he shrank from attention. Harry didn't know Neville's story yet, but he knew the body language of someone who had been made to feel small, and he made a point of sitting next to Neville at meals, including him in conversations, treating him as an equal. Neville responded the way a plant responds to water, slowly, then all at once. One evening in the common room, Harry received a message through the mirror. Not from Ragnarok or Griphook. From Ironclaw. Potter. Two things. First, someone in the Ministry, a woman named Umbridge in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, has filed a formal challenge to the Goblin claim on number 4, Privet Drive. She's arguing that the Treaty of 1743 doesn't apply to Muggle properties on Muggle soil. Harry's stomach tightened. And she's wrong, obviously. The treaty covers all properties held in Goblin-managed trust, regardless of their physical location. But the challenge has been filed, which means it goes before the Wizengamot for review. Which means politics. Ironclaw's reflection looked grim. Director Ragnarok wants you to know that the nation considers this a provocation. If the Wizengamot rules against us, and they won't, but if, the nation will respond. Respond how? You remember the Goblin Wars your textbook gets so wrong? The ones that ended with the Treaty of 1743 in the first place. Ironclaw's grin was sharp enough to cut. Those happened because wizards broke a Goblin treaty. This would be the same thing. We don't bluff, Potter. We don't threaten. We state consequences and then we deliver them. Who's behind Umbridge? We're investigating. She's connected to Fudge, she's his undersecretary. But the filing has Malfoy's fingerprints on it. The language mirrors a legal brief his solicitors prepared 3 years ago regarding a property dispute with the Longbottom estate. Harry filed that. Malfoy, moving pieces. Using Umbridge, using the Ministry, trying to undermine the Goblin-Potter alliance through legal channels. Smart. Indirect. Exactly what Griphook had predicted. What's the second thing? Harry asked. Ironclaw's expression shifted. The Dursleys. Your aunt asked to speak with you. Petunia. She's been different these past weeks. Cooperative. Quiet. The house guard reports that she's been reading from the Potter Library, the books on the enchanted shelf. History of Magic. Lily's school textbooks from the vault. Ironclaw paused. She asked if she could write to you. Harry sat with that for a moment. Petunia, reading Lily's textbooks. Petunia, who had written to Dumbledore at 12, begging to attend Hogwarts. Petunia, who had spent 30 years burying her grief under resentment and cruelty. Tell her she can write, Harry said. Send it through Griphook, no owl post. An Ironclaw? Yes. Make sure she's okay. Not just supervised. Okay. Ironclaw's eyes narrowed slightly. You care about her. She's my mother's sister. My mother would want me to try. The mirror went dark. Harry sat in the common room with the fire crackling and his friends around him and the castle breathing its ancient breath above and below and around, and he thought about the Wizengamot and Umbridge and Malfoy and Petunia and the third-floor corridor and Quirrell's turban and the Philosopher's Stone and the Brother Wand humming on his arm. The game was getting bigger. The pieces were multiplying. And somewhere, in the spaces between the moves, something dark was watching and waiting and growing stronger. Harry pulled out his charms textbook and opened it to the next chapter. Whatever was coming, he intended to be ready.